Cinphomaniac is full of spoilers. If the movie's there in the title, we're probably gonna say everything that happens in it. So don't fucking listen if you don't want to know.
To me, the great hope is just people who normally wouldn't make movies are going to be making them. And, suddenly one day some little fat girl in Ohio is going to be the new Mozart, and make a beautiful film with her little father's camera. To me, the great hope is girl in Ohio is going to be the new Mozart. To me, the great hope is people who normally wouldn't make movies are going to be making them. To me, the great hope is Ohio is going to be the new Mozart. To me, the great hope is people who normally wouldn't make movies are going to be making. To me, the great hope is one day some little fat girl in Ohio is going to just be Mozart. Normally wouldn't make movies in Ohio is making the new Mozart. Just people who normally wouldn't make Mozart and be making. To me, the great hope girl in Ohio is going to make a Mozart beautiful film with her little father's camera recorder, and for once the so-called professionalism about movie Mozart destroyed forever, and it'll really become an art form. That's my opinion.
You saw the movie when? When did you end up seeing? You saw it Saturday?
I ended up seeing The Batman early on Saturday, not in the theater I wanted, but it was available, so.
Okay. Yeah, well, actually,
The
I saw
IMAX
it.
were
Yeah.
all sold out, and I was bummed.
Oh, you're trying to go IMAX?
Yeah, and I was going to wait.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
I was going to wait, but then I didn't want to wait, so I just went to a regular theater.
You made the right choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did I?
Sure.
I wanted IMAX.
I saw it IMAX first, so that's the thing. I'm the spoiled kid who sees everything in IMAX usually first on.
And I don't see
day.
everything in IMAX, but this one seemed like one I wanted to see in IMAX. I feel like I don't need to, and I'm not that spoiled that like I have to see everything. I'm just like, this one I wanted to, and I was like, am I willing to wait for it?
I will say they upped the prices. If you
they did
know.
up the prices, but
yeah, I paid like $30 for an IMAX.
It doesn't matter for me because I have the stubs.
So that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, I've been more curious than I have been about getting on that subs train.
Just because they raise the prices now, it's kind of super worth it. If you even see 1 or 2 movies a month, it pays for itself.
Does it apply to IMAX?
Yeah, any AMC.
That's wild. So like that would include City Walk IMAX, like that. Okay, wow.
Every AMC.
Okay, that's pretty. If you can see City Walk IMAX for free, that's okay.
Well, not for free.
Yeah,
but your monthly membership.
But it, sorry, not for free, but it counts within that. It doesn't like gatekeep you from that. Okay, no. That's crazy.
As long as it's not sold out. As long as it's not sold out, you just go on your app, any AMC. Yeah.
Yeah, that is kind of a game changer.
Now that they raise prices, it's for us, for you, and for me, Marcus. Come on.
Well, exactly. But I mean, again, it like what I've said.
Now that ArcLight's gone, I mean, where do our loyalties lie?
Well, yeah, I don't have any real loyalty.
No one does anymore because everybody's gone.
Everyone's gone. But like, no, for me, here's what it is right now. Because I've talked about this, I feel like on the show before, but like even just like to random people off air, I've talked about this. Like, it's just for me right now. It's like, yes, we have the Batman, and like I like this is actually a good way to get this part of the conversation just kind of like out of the way. Like the movie's doing very good business to no one's real surprise, and this is the business that has been literally entirely absent from the cinema since Spider-Man came out. So it's like And I mean, Spider-Man was doing that kind of business multiple weekends in a row, but like obviously it's still playing. And Uncharted made a little bit of like a crack, but like again, that's like a very relative crack. You know what I mean? It's like it wouldn't be something to write home about, really. This movie comes in, and now people are going to see it. Like I was at a Monday afternoon show yesterday, seeing it for the third time, and at the Rinky Dink AMC, and it was like packed. So that just tells you, like, people are coming to see this movie. They are coming to see it probably multiple times, which I'll also, like, I guess I'll have a chance to elaborate on maybe more why, but also get this out of the way to say, like, very different energy, obviously, than something like Nolan's movies. And particularly, like, I've told you the story on the air before to you about like how I literally saw The Dark Knight Rises, midnight IMAX opening, out of town, drove home like 2.5 hours back upstate, then fucking went and saw it again like that morning, with like sleeping like for 2 hours maybe. And then I saw it like a subsequent like 4 or 5 more times within the next like 3 days.
Does not surprise me. Yes.
Yeah. So I was literally like a crackhead for that movie. And that wasn't the like, so, and I was similarly for The Dark Knight when it came out too. So obviously there, like, it was like, there was a lot of anticipation. It was a threequel, and a trilogy. So there's a very different calculus where I kind of came into this movie like with good expectations, but I had no like there was not like an assumption on my part that like, oh, this is going to do X and X for me, and like, because with The Dark Knight Rises and kind of in the time since, I've had a lot of time to absorb all the criticism of that movie, all my own thoughts of that movie. And honestly, the biggest thoughts I have on all those movies is going to be now in conversation with this movie. So we will talk a little bit about that. But it's just that anticipation, that sort of adrenaline, because I think that's the number one difference between this movie just as even a movie. This movie does not have that adrenaline feeling at all. And it like, and it doesn't need it. That's the point. It's brilliant without that. But like, it wasn't like, so I saw it the second time in a similar way. Like I went to see it Thursday night and then saw it Friday, kind of morning, early afternoon ish. And it was like kind of a slog that second time. Like it didn't make me not like the movie or anything, but I was just very tired. I had a long week. I had a stressful week. And it was just like, without me bringing enough of my own energy to the proceeding, the movie wasn't going to just give it to me. It's not going to like thump me up with like Hans Zimmer shots to the chest of like crazy Nolan set piece hype that will make me go, oh shit, I'm fucking like ripping and roaring. Like I could like literally watch this movie 6 more times with no sleep. Like it just didn't work that way. So I'm really
it's 3
glad.
hours long.
I know, but the TDKR is like close to that. It is the longest Batman movie. And when I even say close to that, like this movie in a weird way is significantly longer and certainly feels longer for all the reasons I'm kind of alluding to. But it was really important. It was really good that I saw it again yesterday. Not because it just made me fresher for this conversation, but because it was like I came in there with the energy, or like the normal amount of energy, and I was with someone. I was with my sister who hadn't seen it yet, and I knew she was really excited about it, and it was a packed theater, and it was like, oh, it hit me all the right ways the third time, even more than the first time. So I'm kind of like, oh, like I didn't like the second time didn't make me suddenly change my actual opinion about the movie, but it did make me feel like in my body a little differently about it. Now I've come full back around to the light side. So I'm excited to have this conversation now in the right kind of framing with all that said. Yeah, that enough from me on this. Like you started talking about you going to the theater to see it, but I have yet to hear from you. And our audience has yet to hear from you, Dana. What'd you actually think of this movie? Because you've had some hot takes lately, so I don't know what I'm expecting from you.
I liked it overall, but I have some words.
Ooh, do you want to start into those words? I'm curious. We'll start wherever you like, and you work your way through.
Are you, Marcus, familiar with the comic book series, The Long Halloween?
Yes, and we're gonna. So I guess maybe a good way to start with that is to say, I've owned that graphic novel for forever. I
There you
did
go.
read it.
Okay.
Yeah, I did read it way back in the day.
Well, but it starts with a serial killer. It starts with a serial killer around Halloween.
Yes. Yeah, of course.
So that's kind of initially where my mind was at. And I was expecting those. I mean, I understand why the storyline is what it is, because it's based on this dark time for Batman, this dark time for Bruce Wayne, really. As a fan, the one thing that I really tend to look forward to is Bruce Wayne being a billionaire playboy for like a second, just like a second. And the one time that Robert Pattinson, who is a very attractive person, is in a suit in this movie, he looks disheveled still. And I understand, like, he doesn't have a haircut. The suit is ill-fitting. I understand this is like depressed Bruce Wayne, sad Bruce Wayne. He's still grieving his parents, I guess, forever. And he's also dealing with all of this new, like, responsibilities and questioning his morale. But I think for me, I still longed for that. I longed for like a little touch of the billionaire to remind me he is the most wealthy citizen in this city. And the one time he doesn't look disheveled and homeless, he still kind of looks homeless because he obviously needs a haircut, and the suit is way too big for him. And he's going to court. So it's like not a reason to like celebrate and be, sexy Robert Pattinson. Other than that, I think that's the reason why he's not my Batman yet. You know what I mean? He can be my Batman, but he can't be my Bruce Wayne yet.
Okay, I'm so glad.
I'll say that.
I am so glad I teed you up in the way I did, because here's the deal. This is like now becoming, this is almost like the season 2 of Cinphomaniac theme now, and I fucking am here for it. I'm going like, you always now pick the one thing that's actually my most praised by far, that all my other praise really stems from on this film, honestly, is the exact choices you talked about. And I am here now to red pill you back into the fucking reality that no, that was like the movie's aces in the hole. And I'm going to try. Again, I might not succeed. I did not succeed on a lot of hype. I might not succeed. I didn't succeed on the Matrix Resurrections either, but that was like more of an intellectual exercise because it wasn't like I loved the movie either. But in this case, I fucking think I might have some legs to stand on, and I could potentially convince you of why this direction was, like, actually, to quote The Dark Knight, not necessarily the one we wanted or needed, but the one we fucking deserved. And like, honestly, like, where I'm at now is like, damn, they put an enormous, I will detail why, but like, they put an enormous pressure on themselves for whatever the sequel to this movie is, because it's gonna now, the stakes are gonna have to be way higher to continue in this direction. Because I've heard a lot of talk, and I'm gonna elaborate on it. I've heard a lot of talk, Dana, of even people who have allegedly loved this movie seemingly wanting or expressing an expectation that the sequel is gonna completely do a 180 from a lot of the things that make this movie. Like, it will be like more traditional billionaire Bruce Wayne. I'm like, oh my God, please fucking kill me. No, do not do that. If Matt Reeves or anyone at Warner Brothers is fucking listening, do not do that. You need to double, triple, quadruple down on what you did in this movie, right? And do not fucking go that way. Nothing will disappoint me and piss me off more. Seriously, if they go that direction. Unless it's like a bait and switch, like Empire Strikes Back, like type of thing. But I'll know by the end of alleged movie 2 if that's what they're doing with it or not. And if it's not that, then I really will be mad. But yeah, like, what I mean by it's almost like the anti Empire Strikes Back. They try to make everything light and fluffy only to drag Bruce back into the mud. But whatever, same difference, I guess. Yeah. Oh man, we're gonna talk about it. Like, I think my thoughts on why I'm saying this, or I hope, are going to become a lot more clear. But throwing it back to you, that aside, Dana.
That aside, I have a few other things to say. I know that some of the choices were for people like us, like you and I, who are real cinephiles, really into it, and we pay attention to symbolism. And that's why this movie is 3 hours long. It was very long. Do you understand? This is the proudest I've ever been of myself. I didn't pee once. It was a very long movie.
Jesus. I didn't either.
I was like, don't drink tea before you go.
Well, no, actually, that's a lie. I did, the first time I saw it, I did run out and had a quick, no, it wasn't even to go to the bathroom. I didn't pee. I was fucking hungry. And I needed to get more food.
I had popcorn, but I usually have like 20 ounces of tea when I first wake up, and I was like, don't do that, because if I drink my tea and then go to the movie, I can't watch the movie. I'm gonna have to pee at least once. So I did not drink my morning tea, and I had like a small tea when I was there, and I was like, sip it. So I don't miss anything. The fact that it's 3 hours, I know wouldn't bother most people, but I do know a lot of people that are like, I just can't. It's 3 hours. Why isn't it 2 movies? If it's 3 hours, that's 2.5 movies, right? But I understand that some of it is because there's a lot of long shots that are kind of symbolistic, or full of symbolism. For instance, one that I liked that I know bothered some people was the reference to the old Western standoff at noon. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, I know what you're talking about. I'm not sure exactly what in this movie. I'm trying to think what you might be referring to.
I was wondering if you had made the same connection, or if you thought the same thing, but maybe not. Okay, so
enlighten me, please.
Our introduction to the Batmobile.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's what I maybe thought you were going to say. Okay,
it's a standoff, and the camera goes from one to the other, to the one, to the other, to the one. It's very like old Western standoffy, where it's like I almost was waiting for a wah, wah, wah. In the background. I was waiting for it.
No, you're 100% spot on. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Where is it?
Okay.
I liked it, but I have heard some people talk about how they're like, why? This is taking forever. What's the point of this? And I'm like, oh, okay. So for those moments, it makes this movie less mainstream. It makes it slightly less accessible for a lot of people.
That's fair. Yeah.
But for you and I, we're like, yay, a reference to old Western standoffs. That's fun.
Oh, yeah.
Also, there's a lot of symbolism with some other shots, like the way that they recreated him entering the club as Batman versus as Bruce Wayne in the exact same shots.
Oh, that's one of my favorite things
I
do. I love that.
Like it. The mirror, but the completely different response, and the different lighting, and the different things the different way he's treated with the exact same shots when he's himself versus when he's himself.
Or how about the long, there's so many actually, because if you want to play this game, you're right. They do the repeating setups multiple times in multiple ways. Yeah.
They're like mirrored shots.
Yeah. One of my favorites, I'll just point it out real quick. We'll probably even talk more about it when I put it, because that's the other thing I was going to say, Dana, is like, yeah, I'm going to explain why if it's not abundantly obvious. Anyone who's been listening to this pod would probably already know that this movie was clearly designed in a lab to appeal to me. But like, I almost wanted to hold that against this movie, and I can't, because it actually succeeded. And that's like why it's going to be fun to talk about. But no, I'm going to trace the entire genre genealogy of this movie for everybody. But and other people have done it, but I'm gonna do a better job than they did, hopefully. I think, but my favorite of the mirrors is actually, and then for some reason it didn't quite occur to me the same way it did until the third time, but there's just so much to process in this movie. That's why, again, like, it's great to see it multiple times. The opening, like, and we're going to talk more about the genealogy with it, like kind of DePalma, Hitchcock POV with Riddler's like spying on the mayor and his son. That opening voyeur POV is basically entire, and it's a long take, is more or less completely recreated and mirrored in the context of Batman voyeur over Selena Kyle, and it's his point of view shot, and he's looking through different set of binoculars, and he's not doing the heavy breathing or any of that, thank God. But it's arguably way more sexualized and perverted, obviously, because it actually is him watching a girl getting undressed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
and I was like,
and
why
I love
watching?
that they fucking did that. I said I actually turned over to my sister during it, and I've obviously been thinking this. It's something I'm gonna talk about it. They finally did it after fucking 31 years of my life. They finally gave me a Batman movie or Batman content, because to the extent that this has been done in the comics, and I know it has, I haven't really experienced it, where Batman is the twisted pervert that we all know he is. Finally, they gave it to me. And I'm like, now we can actually get, and this is where I'm not going to get into it just yet, but this is partly the jumping off point for all the rest of the emo goth, like kind of like the whole journey of this version of Batman is so it's to me, they finally actually, I didn't even realize how not right they had really not gotten it until I saw how right they got it here. And I'm like, this is what he always needed to be. Makes way more sense than any other version of Batman to me. Way more sense. And certainly in a modern context, but that's the irony of the modernism of this movie. It, in some ways, it's trying to be very modern and very to the point, and to its credit, but its entire frame of reference is noir. Like in other subgenres and related genres, but like we're going to talk about it. Like this might be the most neo-noir in the sense that like both senses of the term, like it is taking the most true parts of that sense of the past and what made the genre what it was in the past and made the movement of it what it was meant to represent, why the motifs of it are the way they are, and actually really translating them to the modern world. And even though this movie, by that same token, feels like such an other world to our world, like I think it does both at the same time, and that contradiction is actually the most fascinating part of the movie to me. It's like a mirror of our world. You know what I mean? Like, I think that like the Nolan films were just like, you could argue that they were that, but they weren't. They were trying to be like, we know we are this world. There's just a guy with Batman suit on and all this stuff. And it believe me, at the time it worked, and it still works. And like, those movies are great. I still love them a lot, but this whole thing made me realize that like, no, there was a much further to go with that. And they didn't quite go all the way there. And I think this movie owes a lot to those movies, just in terms of like that those movies had to walk so this movie could run. But now that this movie is running, it's hard not to like look back at those movies and be like, oh, you were just walking, you know?
Sure.
Like this movie's not running. Actually, you know, here's an interesting place I didn't expect to go, but I'll start. So I think a lot of men of a certain age, and certainly from a certain like period in the time, can relate a lot to this Batman. And I'll say, I don't mean that like necessarily the moodiness or that, though that's there, but just like, I feel like this Bruce Wayne, this Batman, we'll talk about that duality or lack thereof. He would just like scarf down a bunch of food and just move like that. That's his thing. He's like, I guess I have to eat now, and then move on, like to get back to business. In like the most just like juvenile and animal-like way, which is what I just.
Well, yeah, Alfred has to remind him to shower and stuff.
Totally. No, the amount of like it's almost like not fair to call it subtext, because if you're looking for it, it's very loud. But I was very much paying attention to it on this third watch. Was like just every line of dialogue, every exchange with Alfred is straight up just like the like, get out of my room, Dad, like me. Like even the very serious, you lied to me, was like, you lied to me. You fucking did cheat on Mom. Fuck you. Very much that energy. You don't know the kind of music I listen to.
He's relatable a lot. I like when like his parachute didn't open and he ate shit, you know? it made him more relatable.
That was a great little twist.
Perfect
Yeah.
Batman. He's not the perfect, most athletic. Sometimes he also eats shit.
Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't say twist. I just mean like subversion of expectation. Like, because that even got me. I was not expecting that to happen, but as soon as it did, I was like, "That's awesome! I'm glad they did that." Yeah, no, for sure. Because it's just like one of those things where you take it for granted. This is what I mean about, again, comparing them, and I'm going to try not to do it too much, but it's going to have to happen here, being an example. Comparing it to past Batman movies, particularly the Chris Nolan ones, because Chris Nolan's trilogy started with Batman Begins. The whole point of it allegedly was like, we're going to give you the detailed origin. We're going to even be more origin-y and more detailed than like Batman Year One, which I know you know. So like and I think that's an interesting choice. Like, this movie has more in common with quote Year One than that one, even though it's technically Year Two. And I know there is a Year Two comic. I've never read it. I've not.
There is a Year
anything.
Two comic. Yeah.
I get the impression it's not good because in a lot of ways, The Long Halloween is meant to be the Year Two comic before they made an actual Year Two comic. You know, I think again, I'm not an expert on, or I'm not as tuned into the Batman comics as I used to be. So I'm just like going off of like memory from like 15 years ago, but like I'm pretty sure that's kind of like the general gist. Anyway, yeah, I'm glad they did that, went that direction, because it made Batman, as you said, like feel more relatable, but just also just like gave me that sense of like when we talk about the realism, or like the realism, the intended realism of the Chris Nolan movies. Obviously, I have no doubt that Nolan's intention, as stated, was always to make the most realistic and grounded version of the character possible. But like the scope of what might have been seen as possible at the time, given the previous Batman, given the expectations, given just like where the genre was at, and like obviously he went to define the genre. And I think what Christopher Nolan was ultimately interested in, which is all the stuff you see in subsequent films, including Tenet, which of course starred Robert Pattinson, is like this more like sort of like big international set piece, kind of drenched in a certain kind of light kind of thing. And he was ultimately just mainly, I think above all else, interested in using the Batman movies as a vehicle to do that stuff. And he did. And now he's able to do it without that. And I think he also was very taken in an interesting way that this movie is almost like in fierce opposition to. Take it in with the idea of hero mythology. And I think those movies, that's actually maybe my favorite thing about those movies. And other than just the individual set pieces and adrenaline, like, is like, especially when you look at the whole scope of the trilogy, that hero mythology building. And I'm curious to see if we do get a trilogy out of this, like I'm presuming we will, how this ultimately, yeah, I assume we will, how this like new trilogy ultimately stands apart from that in that department. I think it's setting itself up to greatly stand apart from it. But like I was alluding to earlier, there is a part of me that worries the wrong notes will get listened to on the sequel. Anyway, just backtracking to the point about the Nolan and the realism, is that because of that interest in the hero mythology, because of the context of the time, because of the expectations, because of just like the perceived boundaries and limits, his Batman basically becomes good at everything almost immediately. The way Christian Bale plays the character is like he kind of just is just super competent and chill. Like, yes, like you have when he's training with like quote, air quote, draws out Ghoul in the League of Shadows, that whole part of the movie obviously shows him fumbling a lot. But by the time he's like back in Gotham and like donning the cape and cowl, it's kind of like he just like literally says, "I'm Batman," and just like moves on, basically.
Yeah.
You know? So, and then TDK, it's like not even a thought, like, you know? So, you know, like this is taking the approach of like, it's quote Year Two, but I still am like a squirrely amateur in many ways. And I'm like we said, I don't know. It's hard to tell how old he's quote supposed to be. I don't think he's supposed to be as old as Rob Pattinson actually is, but I don't think he's necessarily meant to be 22 either. Though you could be fooled into thinking maybe that, because just like certain parts of like if I look at those Thomas Wayne flashback stuff, that feels to me like late 90s, early 2000s. So
Okay.
I feel like the character is supposed to be my age, if not younger. At least.
And you can also maybe make that assumption when the relationship with him and Alfred too. That kind of is indicative of his youth, you know?
Totally. So I think he's like anywhere between like 24 and 31, but which is a broad range generally. But I think I like that feeling. I like that feeling of like, and it works with the rest of it, which is very important. And I think what's also interesting about that contextually and genre wise is that, you know, like from whether you're talking about Bogart or Robert Mitchum, like noir heroes, or even Elliot Gould and Long Goodbye, like noir heroes are typically old, gruff veterans. And we know what that version of Batman looks like. Like we've seen it a million times now in comics, but like even in the movies, because they were trying to some degree go for that with Ben Affleck, literally the previous Batman. So, you know, I think they didn't want to repeat that, but it was like what Reeves basically tried to do was like, I'm going to take all the mood and feeling of that I'm a grizzled veteran noir stuff and like kind of like reverse it, but keep it the same, even despite reversing it. And I think that's what I'm talking about. That's actually a great place to like highlight everything in this movie is kind of that same magic trick. It's like, and it's like the best type of magic trick for me. And like, it's going to give me a lot to work with right now. I am embracing the contradictions and like embracing them to the point where they kind of transcend their contradiction and just become like, oh, it actually just makes this deep intuitive sense that's like hard to explain, but it's there and it's so omnipresent that you just like fall into it. Like, I'm like, yes, he is both a like literally a teenage boy, man-child, and a grizzled veteran, even though he obviously cannot be the latter if he's the former. Like, it's amazing how they do it. Like, they're just like, oh yeah, he is fucking Robert Mitchum in fucking, you know, like a Marlowe movie. Like, it's like so cool. Like I'm blown away. So that's maybe how I really want to like frame it. Cause I said, I'm going to convince you. So this is the highest bar. I don't know if I'm going to convince you of this, but I'm hoping I convince you of some of what follows. This is the best Batman, if that's not clear. And I don't just mean like it's the best Batman movie. I mean, it's, to me, the best depiction of Batman that I know of, that I've experienced. And and we're going to talk about many of the other depictions. I'm going to reference them. And you could say it's recency biased, fine, but I mean it. Like, I didn't know what I was missing until I saw this movie. And I'm not trying to overpraise the movie because, like I said, like, to me, a lot of it is also what it speaks about the potential of what they can do in a sequel, what they can do going forward. I think
the sequel is going to be the thing to convince me. I still think The Dark Knight. I still think Christian Bale. I still think those movies have a more comic book element to them in their cadence, in their style of acting. I get it. The voice was like a big choice, but however, I do think that it has somewhat of a more fantastical element.
No, it does. That's kind of what I was alluding to.
Which is what I like. Which is what I'm waiting to see a little bit of. I also thought, I don't know if you thought this too, although he knocked it out of the park, in my opinion, Colin Farrell seemed like an interesting choice. He did a great job, but Colin Farrell in a fat suit, he's the only one in a fat suit. It seems an odd choice when there are actors that don't need a suit to be a character, and you could maybe give them a shot.
Well, okay.
However, he knocked it out of the park.
He did. Okay, so I think you raise a very interesting and good question with this. And if you had asked me after seeing it the first time, I would have been like, kind of, I feel like in sync with what you just said. But seeing it again, and particularly this third time, all of a sudden I felt like it all made perfect sense to me for a couple reasons. Like, one is like, they cast Colin Farrell because it's a kind of a stunt casting move, which is always good PR for your movie. Like, Colin Farrell's in it as the Penguin. You will not be able to recognize him. It's crazy. It's good marketing. So like studios are going to go for it. Actors, even though I will never, I mean, you're an actor, so maybe you can explain it to me. I will literally never understand this. It feels like the worst type of torture. But like the idea of like, yes, sign me up to spend 10 hours in a makeup chair every fucking day when there's only 24 hours in a day. I'm like, what's going on?
That entirely depends on the actor. 100%. I'm comfortable. I'll sleep for 10 hours. You can move my arms, you can move my face, you can put glue stuff on my head. I don't care. I'm asleep. There are some actors that can't sleep and cannot relax when people are touching them, poking them, prodding them, moving their limbs.
Yeah, I would be one of them.
So for me, I would hope that Colin Farrell, for his sake, is more like myself, where like, I don't care. You can brush out my hair. I'm not going to wake up. I could sleep.
Well, if there's any clip of him talking about this, I haven't seen it or heard it. But yeah. I'm going to assume that he was okay with it because, again, this whole stunt casting nature, he obviously was like, it wasn't like, oh, by the way, we need you to put makeup. It was like the entire pitch for him to do this role was like, this is going to involve you being.
You're going to have to do this.
So like he obviously signed up for it, well aware.
Or going to Danny DeVito you here a bit.
Right. So I have to assume that he did that like feeling like either, oh, I'm totally fine. It won't matter to me. Or I'm so like excited to do this. I don't care.
Bad that I don't care.
I will go through it. Either way, it's not like it's not like I feel sorry for him. And that's not why I bring it up. I just mean to bring it up because it blows my mind. And so with that all being a given, yeah, I think what's occurred to me very much on the third time and slowly in between after the first time and not quite on the first time watching was like, because the first time watching, I was just a little too distracted by the thought, like, holy shit, is that really Colin Farrell under there? Like, what is up with this character? Blah, blah, blah. The third time, and I could, like, honestly, the audience was like helping with this. Just the way they were like laughing at all the shit. And my sister even turned over to me. He's like, he's just being Robert De Niro. And I'm like, oh, yeah, no, completely. And that's exactly right. He is just doing like Colin Farrell as an actor. This makes sense to me now in the context of Colin Farrell's acting and like what he tends to like to do. He of course he wants to just be Robert De Niro. So he's just like, yeah, I will put on 10 pounds of makeup and be the fucking Penguin if what that ultimately means is I get to pretend I'm in Goodfellas. And he's like, okay, cool. So like, you know what I mean?
By the way, Marcus,
yeah,
10 pounds of makeup is a gross understatement. That with the suit, with everything, he's got 45 pounds.
Did I say 10 pounds?
You said 10. 10 ain't nothing. He's got like a young Bieber, just that amount of weight, you know.
Oh no, he's got a whole second person on him.
A whole nother person with the weight, yeah. And it's foam, so it's like, you know, it's cumbersome. But hopefully, you know, it wasn't too bad for him because
I like I said, I haven't seen any like doc or like mini thing on his makeup. I'm sure that'll come out if it hasn't already. But I did watch, going back a few months, the one on Baron Harkonnen and Dune. And like, yeah, like that thing allegedly weighed like a lot. And it was like, he really couldn't like move very much after that. And it's a testament, but I think getting back, and I wasn't like trying to make this about praising the hair and makeup, but like they did do a brilliant job. I really, again, noticed on the third one, I think that's why it really worked for me because like, you could see all the nuances of his facial acting. It felt like it was a real person moving their face. It was not like, oh, now he's like caged in here and he can't really move his like eyes or cheeks in the way he needs to really perform. I mean, it's possible there was some CG assistance or something weird like that going on, but I don't think so. I assume it was all through the prosthetic genuinely on camera until I'm told otherwise. And in which case that's incredibly impressive makeup work just from a functional point of view. And like, cause you don't always get that. Like, it's very hard from what I understand to allow that level of like freedom and movement, like in that. I'm so very impressive.
A lot of silicone as well. They probably did a cast of his whole body, like made him sit in some, what is it called? Plaster.
Yeah. Plaster,
and then they take it out and then fill it with a basically like a liquid latex that then dries into like a gelatin.
Oh yeah, no, I've
super good.
seen a lot of these, like them doing this stuff, and it's cool. It's very
But
I'm very excited to see the one they make for this when they.
But like, imagine they
when
just
do.
pick somebody like Paul Giamatti, and they're like, "Hey, Paul Giamatti, just eat a couple extra cakes this week," and he'll be like, "Yeah, okay."
I'm sure Paul Giamatti was on their short list to do it, but like he's been on the short list to do it probably for fucking 5 different Batman movies, and it's like that's the thing. I think part of the reason they did it, it's like stunt casting, but it's also like put your flag in the sand casting. Like, we're not doing what you expect. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's smart. Like that's smart marketing at the very least. And I think in terms of the texture of the film, and this is what I'm saying about Colin Farrell, I think really being actually this very inspired choice, is that, like I said, it like he's doing like what he could be doing. He could be doing this without all the makeup. The fact that he's doing with the makeup is just like the sort of like kind of like, I don't know, like making physical the performance in a way. Like, you know what I mean?
It's more about your voice and your movements thing. Yeah, and the
It's just like visual.
A lot in the voice. A lot in the voice.
Yeah, so I think he does an amazing job, but like just putting it back to the broader point, because we are going to talk a little bit about the craftsmanship. I wasn't expecting to talk about that part, so I'm glad we touched on it. But like I said, I think this is the best depiction of Batman I've ever seen. Like understanding it from the perspective of what I take Batman to mean. All the thoughts I've had for practically 30 years about what the Batman character is, what it represents, what it doesn't represent, all the different arguments of other interpretations, all the thinking and analyzing and contextualizing, all of that to me has led to this point of like, this is the Batman I didn't even know I needed or deserved. And now he's here. And this is to me the final form. I mean, I know it won't literally be, but it feels like that. It feels like the Pokemon has evolved into Charizard. It's like the final form. It's like, yes, here it is. This is where the promise of Charmander ends. All right. So it's like,
I see what you're getting at with kind of the realism and kind of the depressed state of Batman here, but he doesn't stay there for long.
Well, but okay, hold on. But Dana, like I got it, because like I think that's the thing. It's like I haven't really said why this is yet. Like, and it's because you're right, but like it's like so here's where I start with that. This is like the biggest, and this is what I meant when I said I think the thing that you said you didn't like is that, to me, like the sort of keystone codex breaker of like the entire, all the rest of it of what I'm going to say. So there is no duality. There's no false pretense of cosplaying as Bruce Wayne or vice versa. There's no like validation of this idea of what Bruce Wayne is. And there's competing Bruce Waynes in lore and previous interpretations and something. We're going to outline that. And there's a very particular sort of like we're going to talk about this too, like kind of political bent to how one can interpret or contextualize Bruce Wayne and Batman, right? This film starts from a place of like, we're actually going to explore all of that and critique all of that by abdicating from it, at least at the start, or seemingly embracing it full-throatedly in a singular kind of form, and then starting to basically deconstruct that. So I love that. There's no Tony Stark. I mean, again, we're in a post-MCU world, so now they have to be more conscious of like, oh, Batman, Tony, like there's no Tony Stark. There's no like, I call like Elon Muskism. There's none of that shit. There's no separation. Like a lot of people have said, because I've listened to other people talking about this movie, and I think they're not quite right when they say it, but I think the intention of what they mean is getting at the heart of what I'm getting at. They're like, oh, you barely have Bruce Wayne in this movie at all. And I'm like, yes, because there is no Bruce Wayne and there is no Batman. There is just this person. I don't even know what to call him. He's the person played by Robert Pattinson, right? And like, he's just that person. He's that person every minute of the movie, every scene. Doesn't matter if he's talking with fucking Alfred, or he's at the funeral, or he's literally beating the shit out of someone, or he's any of the in between, looking around the case with Gordon. Doesn't matter. He is the same fucking person. And that's not to try to simplify it or take away from the complexity. I think people put too much stock into this idea of like dual identities or this or that, or he's Bruce Wayne by day and Batman by night shit. And like, I think there is been, or as far as I know, been a good comic tradition of like deconstructing that already. So this is building from that. But I love the leap that they've seemingly taken with it, where they're just like, no, fuck that shit. That shit's weak. That shit's like bullshit. There's no separation. There is just a guy who's severely messed up and he does weird shit and he doesn't give a fuck about what other people think of him. And like, I'm like, that feels more true to me. It feels to me now when I think of Batman, I do think of like this guy who's like just this moody, like spoiled kid. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it makes a lot more sense. Like, I think that obviously, you know, going back to the fucking like, you know, origins of the comic and all that stuff, like the concept of Batman and is why it's had such sticking power is fundamental. It does make sense. It does speak to something. It is there. But obviously, as things have evolved, you got to kind of evolve with it. And the comics and the movies have done that. But I think that, like I said, they were kind of still a little bit in ways they might not have been aware of at the time, or I was even aware of at the time, a little bit too deferential and a little bit too stuck in something. Because I feel like the Nolan movies, to their credit, were very clear about the blurriness of that identity or the sort of concept of like, this is the real you. But I always felt like, because I remember obsessing over thinking about this back in the day on that. And I always felt like I had a strain to do all the work because the movie just wasn't all that interested in that, even though I was. And here now I got a movie that was so interested in that and was like primarily about that. Like the whole entire trajectory of like what's going on with him and the Riddler and ultimately even where he ends up at the end of the movie, because there is a journey, there is a major shift and change. It is a good story that way, but the shift and change is not the one we've gotten before, not the one we would expect. And I think even the way a lot of people are interpreting it is a little bit, hopefully, only the sequel will really prove this, wrong. And so I'm going to try to give what I think is the quote correct one. Yeah, so that's kind of like where I'm starting from. It's this single identity journey, right? So at the start, he's this kind of like trauma looping drug addict kind of character in a sense. He's like this sadist. He's tortured. He's an obsessive genius and a detective, right? Like, and all the things I just said are, if you're familiar with different noir tropes or different noir lead detective, lead hero kind of character traits, those are all things that have been done a million times in different ways. Most like the origins and roots of noir are the trauma of coming back from World War II, the trauma of coming back from World War I, if you go even earlier roots, the trauma of the Great Depression. You're like stuck. You're stuck in the past. Like that's why nostalgia and all these different things are such fundamental themes. It's like there's always a flashback. There's always I lost this buddy in the war. There's always that kind of core to that character, and it haunts them at night, and it's where their demons come from. It's like this idea of like, and then that's where the drug addictness parts of it come in. And obviously, this is not like a drug addict per se, not directly, but I mean the behavior, the whole, even the fact that he calls himself a quote nocturnal animal, all these things. It's like he's not different than the quote drop heads he's beating up. That's another very important thing. Like he's just like this sort of like sickly, like pale ass dude who might as well be a heroin addict. And then that ties right back in to a lot of this other set of influence that's being brought to it. This sort of 90s post grunge Kurt Cobain thing they're trying to go for it. And like it all synthesizes together. So that's like kind of like key to this idea. So that's how it's able to navigate the contradiction I was alluding to earlier, where Bruce is both. No, I think that's what I mean when I say that sort of like amazing way it's able to dive into that contradiction. Because like when I look at Bruce with his long hair and his sunglasses, it's kind of like, oh, right, this is drawing me into this style and this influence of this like Kurt Cobain kind of rock star guy. And it's like, okay, but that's still the same contextually where it matters as this grizzled detective character too. There are different forms with the same core, and the movie just so elegantly swims in all those waters at the same time, right? Like it doesn't, without making it like not work. It's cohesive in its synthesis. And it's important because, like I said, this single identity journey is ironically the journey of Bruce, or so this is why I want to have a third name to call this character. And I can't use vengeance because I have to use that to label something else. I'll just call him Battinson. How about that? Pattinson. That's something the internet made up, but I'm going to use it for this purpose. Okay. The journey of Pattinson is actually ironically about learning about the quote identities of both Bruce Wayne and the Batman. Like that's actually what's happening in the story. He's learning about what the Batman is, and he's learning about what the Bruce Wayne is. And not for him necessarily. He's learning about them because, like, ironically, again, tying it back to Nolan movies. Nolan movies are always talking about the symbol. I have to be a symbol. And it's like, there's none of that in this movie. Instead, the movie is actually a much more internalized psychological journey into understanding through Bruce's point of Pattinson's point of view, that the Bruce Wayne identity exists whether he wants it to or not. The Batman identity exists whether he wants it to or not. He thinks he does, but he starts to question that, right? They exist whether he wants them to or not. They exist independently of them. So as a result, this journey concerns the idea of what they mean, what they represent, how the rest of the world experiences them, and the consequences of their actions and their consequences of their inactions, right? What they don't do is just as important as what they do. And the reaction to them is important. Like, obviously, and we're going to get more into it, so I don't want to try to like cram it all in right this second. But obviously, the entire point of the Riddler's character, as he himself explains, as his followers explain, they're taking their cues of Batman. They think Batman's their leader. So their perception of Batman, what that symbol means to them, is directly leading to the consequences of their actions. That's the cause to their effect, right? Likewise, doesn't matter that Pattinson is not interested in being Bruce Wayne, or the rest of the world perceives his existence. They react to it. They're like, some people, like when he tries to go to the club in that scene you said the mirror, they're like, oh, I know who you are. Or when he's going in the funeral car, right? Falcone records. Or when it's like just the fact that the mayor is like, why don't you give more money? Why don't you do this? His actions or lack thereof have consequences. It doesn't matter that he's personally disconnected from them. They are still a part of reality and an extension of his existence. So he has to deal with them whether he likes it or not. And this movie is the journey of him learning that he has to deal with them. And that's why I get to like the sequel is going to be where it actually has to answer the question of how does he deal with them? And that's why it's kind of like this unknown, ambiguous thing. I just really like that we've at least established now that this is a question worth exploring, and that even I hope they don't get the answer wrong, because I feel like I know what the answer should be, both for my own personal taste and by the setup of this movie. And I just, as I alluded to, I've heard some other people read it and they're getting the same sort of point, but when they talk about what they expect the outcome to be or what they expect from this so-called sequel is where they lose me. And I'm like, ooh, you have a very different desire than mine. And that worries me because I'm like, fuck, I hope Matt Reeves and the creative team are much more in my camp than they are in the camp of these other people. And I think one of the things, and we're going to have to talk about this, that colors that distinction is something that's kind of at the wedge of a lot of pop culture. We've been talking about it in different ways in other forms, but the difference that I think is coloring why some people like read this potential sequel or this potential outcome or the potential even meaning of what's happened in this film differently is a perception of how they perceive the world from a political point of view. Because this movie is very interesting.
Interesting.
Yes, I do. Because this movie, I mean, and again, it's to a major credit to this movie. And like, there is a deep tradition, not only in noir, but in many of the other genres that are in this movie's DNA that have their common ancestor in noir are like, you know, we'll get into more, but like 70s, a lot of studies on the 70s is very concerned with and very colored by the political landscape, very colored by the mood in America, the mood in the world, the sense of where we are or aren't in history. And this movie, and to be, again, walking before this movie could run, the Chris Nolan movies, especially now in hindsight, but people recognized it very thoroughly at the time, were also very of their moment politically. Like Dark Knight is very much a reaction to the ongoing war on terror and all that means and doesn't mean. Dark Knight Rises is very much a reaction to the recession and Occupy Wall Street and all these different things. So these things have been part of the Batman DNA on screen before.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this movie is a lot harder to place, at least, not for me, but I feel like I'm just assuming for people in general, is a lot harder to place in terms of like necessarily what it's trying to get at. And I think that, again, because it's not just like, oh, I'm smart, I get it. No, it's actually because this movie is itself a little bit unsure. But I think that lack of being sure, it's like the number one critique I have about it. And I'm gonna get into it. But it's also in some ways a small degree part of it gets saving grace, because I think, because my genuine assumption is if they were a little bit more clear, they might have been a little bit more clear in the wrong direction. And I'd rather them be ambiguous and leave the better direction open. And that's kind of, so I'm going to try now to like maybe allude to this a little bit more directly. So when I talk about those identities, right? The Batman and the Bruce Wayne, that Pattinson has to kind of like recognize that the reactions exist. They exist whether he wants them to or not. So the actual story then becomes him, or where he ends up in the story. This is how I interpret a lot of like the ending, or like where we're leaving things off. He, by recognizing them, comes to a point where he can actually reject the false good, the false so-called good of both Batman and Bruce Wayne, and instead choose a new path, right? Like the path that's why I'm saying the sequel cannot go back to the familiar anything. It has to drive forward towards something we haven't seen really before. I have some idea that where that is. There's actually a comic book inspiration to it. But I'll say that. So he's driving towards this, like, again, this new synthesis, just like the movie itself is this new synthesis. And we're going to have to wait and see what that looks like. But it's got to be a lot smarter than what I call the very dumb kind of like, just like regurgitated, like, oh, and again, I love some versions of this just as like for what they are. Like I have fond memories of like the sort of like chummy, like kind of like weird square jawed nice guy version from the animated series. You know what I mean? Of like that Bruce Wayne, like cool.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, absolutely. With the big,
like the Kevin Conroy voice. Yeah, his voice makes it cool, but I'm just like, I don't need that in 2024 when this movie comes out as like Robert Pattinson, who was cast to play a very different character, suddenly trying to be that guy. I don't need that. Like, no, I don't want that.
I don't know if anybody needed that, but I'm still holding out hope that I'm going to get a glimpse of like a glamorous Bruce Wayne at some point in the next film. I know you don't want it, but I do.
Okay, let me ask you this, because maybe there's not as much of a difference of opinion as there might seem to be. When you say that, do you just mean you just want to see him like look cleaner?
I want him to be the billionaire playboy that he's supposed to be.
Okay, no. So I guess what I'm asking is,
I'm sure he'll do it for a reason. He'll do it to save people. He'll do it for a charity ball where someone else is going to die and he'll have to do it to save everybody or whatever. But it needs to happen.
Yeah. No. Okay. No. So I'm glad I asked the question, Dana, because I think this just puts a fine line in the fact that no. We definitely do sincerely and maybe quite deeply disagree about this. But I'm hoping I can make my case make sense to you enough where even if you don't fully agree with it, like you see where I'm coming from. Okay. I just think, like I said, obviously this, to me, this like grunge goth emo nocturnal animal Pattinson guy is the neo-noir hero that we deserve and need. And like the evolution that he goes through in this movie is not like to move away from that to me. It's what it is to recognize these other paths as being something to reject, not in like a turn backward, but like I said, a way to reject and find a new path that is forward, that is a progression, but it's not the familiar progression. And I think it has to be that, because to go to what you're describing, Dana, I think would be a betrayal, not just of what has been established in this movie, but a betrayal of what this movie could be driving at. And that will close the door on it really ever being able to effectively drive at that. Unless it's like I mean, I guess I could maybe like ghostwrite a version that would somehow still do that, but it would
exactly. There's a way.
No, it would be very strenuous. It would be very like unnecessary. It's like making
it would have to involve Selena. It would have to involve Selena somehow. I also really like that Selena is Falcone's daughter, like in the comics.
Yeah, a lot of I've heard people like say that they didn't like that. I'm like, that is from the comics.
It's literally from the comics. I'm glad that they stuck with that. I'm really happy about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of little touches like that. But okay, so I think before I can go really in any further depth about like the whys and hows of like what I was getting at, I think we got to just back it up and talk about the real star of the movie, which actually isn't Robert Pattinson. It's the score. It's the music. And I think they knew that. They knew that. That's why they fucking blasted that fucking thumping in the trailer. But actually, that's actually my least, even though it's iconic now, it's actually my least favorite bit of music in the movie. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, well, I am talking about the quote theme for the Batman, but it's actually the other part of it. Like this, like very sweeping, very losty kind of sounding thing, which I say that because it is Michael Giacchino doing it. Yeah. Or the best piece of music that he made for the movie isn't even in the movie. If you listen to the soundtrack, when you listen to the extended Catwoman theme piece, which is my favorite piece, that's actually my favorite piece.
Really?
Because it's so noir to that point. The version that he puts at the end of the soundtrack goes full blown jazz improv and piano, and it's like, yo, this is right out of The Long Goodbye. What the fuck? I need this in my DNA right now. Like, this is so fucking cool. This is exactly what I live for. But yeah, I think it's brilliant. And in a roundabout shortcut, Dana, to me, this Batman music that I'm talking about.
Can you hear my cat?
No, but you got a lot of them.
I just have
you have a thing about stress.
he's trying to go outside, but I try to get him to go outside earlier. Now it's too late. I don't want to go outside.
Well, so here's the thing, Dana. Like, the score to me, it's hard to articulate why, because we already really talked about the mood or effective music, but also is part of like the sincerity I feel of like, no, this is a new path. Like, when I hear this Batman theme, I'm like, this theme wouldn't fit with these other hypothetical Bruce Waynes.
Well, no,
it wouldn't fit. It wouldn't fit.
Exactly. They needed to do a different version. I agree.
But yeah, you're right. You could look at it, of course. Well, it's scored to the movie. But I'm kind of taking it from the opposite direction. To me, it's like that song communicates to me why it has to be what it is. It cannot be something else. Like, it has to be this. And that has to be is like a Bruce that's like, oh, and you mentioned Selena. We're going to talk about her in a moment. But actually, that relationship, who Catwoman is in this movie, the even desire to use Catwoman in this movie, everything with Selena and his relationship, including how it ends, is to me directly symbolic and directly reason to my entire sort of framework that I'm playing. It's like Selena is basically telling him, you must not fall into these traps. Don't blow it next time by reverting to the bullshit that is actually a lie this whole movie's theme is no more lies. Like, I mean, oh man, I'm gonna get into it. I am just realizing like how many things this movie speak loud to me about like why I'm insistent on these points. But
okay,
before I get to that, okay, another great tool in the toolbox that we have to shout out is Greg Fraser. Bad right off his yeah, because he did Dune. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of movies coming out though this year that like, but like it's definitely the early front runner, deservedly so. Nevertheless, but yeah, Greg Fraser's cinematography, and it's actually been fascinating because I have been listening to some interviews with director Matt Reeves, and he's talked very technically about like the process that they used on this and some of the lenses they used, and it's awesome. It's exactly what I fucking love, and you can tell when you see the movie. But like, they're like basically existing in this world where, I mean, technically they shot on digital, but they did use film in part of the process. But they're basically, with the lens choices and the camera choices and the technique choices, they're basically like, in the rig choices even, they're kind of operating in this world where it's like, what if the last 40 years of movies didn't happen? And then you just pick right back off where like 1980 left off, and you just jump it to 2020. And that's what we did. Right. Like, so it just feels so in that tradition. It's like the way we're going to talk about DePalma, like the way it uses POV, the way it's using depth of field, the way it's like using kind of these scuffed ass fucking lenses that, according to Matt Reeves, the camera house is like, are you trying to like fuck with us? Like, don't do that. And then he's like, oh, we're doing it. Like, they're like, you're making what? Why? Like, they're like, they wanted to give us an F, and that was like how we knew we got it right. Well, yeah, you know, they're yeah. So yeah, I love hearing shit like that.
If you don't upset people, right?
Yep. No,
you're not
for real.
saying anything.
For real, facts. And I think just zooming out a little bit more of what I mean with this aesthetic, like, the choice to make the color palette so singular, the choice to, but like very selectively, like switch it up in various points too. I don't want to give that impression because I think a lot of people said everything is just red and black, and I'm like dominantly, but you'll miss the margins, you'll miss the blues and purples when they're selectively used, and the grays when they're selectively used, and it's very effective when they're selectively used the way they are. And even the greens, actually. There's some greens. Riddler, obviously. Yeah. Not his costume. His costume is like so dark and olive that it's like.
I did think brown. That Paul Dano at first. Mm-hmm. So I was a little confused by one or two points of his performance, but then I actually talked to somebody who has seen an actual breakdown of a person in an asylum. And at first I was like, why is he just doing this blank scream, this pelican scream at nothing? It doesn't, like, there's nothing in his eyes. It's like dead eyes screaming at nothing. And then I talked to my friend who's like, oh, that's what it's like. He did his homework. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay. Get it, Paul Dano. Of course, Paul Dano did his homework, but I assume he did his homework in the way he said he did his homework, which is, the Riddler's obsessed with Batman. So I read Batman comics 24/7. Like, yeah, that makes sense. But the like, make sure your eyes are doing nothing and just open, not blinking while you scream into the wall. You know, choices that I kind of was turned off by initially. The more research I did and people, I was like, wow, great job.
Well, no, I mean, that's good to know, but I'll just say from my point of view, and I don't know, maybe this is kind of a self-report. But like, no, everything he did rang incredibly accurate and true to my experience. So like, I get that guy. I think a lot of people in the audience do, particularly young men of a certain like background, will get it. And then that's important because it is trying to speak to those things. And just like Pattinson himself is, like, that's why this works. This is kind of again, I'll put more meat on this bone in a bit, but this is kind of the school shooter fan club like thing going. They got going.
Yeah, of course.
And they have that in common. Yeah.
On the Zodiac Killer.
Oh, as someone who's seen Zodiac a bunch of times, I also.
No. His actual, like, the director actually said that your character is based on the Zodiac Killer.
Well, no, I know he's actually in Zodiac is a real person, but I'm saying the movie Zodiac is also an influence on this movie, and it's a movie I've seen a billion times. So, like, I'm just saying, like, no, all of that. That's what I'm saying. None of that rang false to me because it's all very familiar to me from both real life and to cinema. So, like, I just was like, no, I was totally there for it. And Paul's performance is also just, I mean, I think it's genius on its own terms, but it's also just, from my point of view, a kind of callback or cousin or descendant of his all-time performance in There Will Be Blood. So I'm just like, it's kind of what I expected, but that's not a bad thing because I expected what I wanted and that's what I got. Just okay, but backing up because, like, you know, we decided cinematography. So Matt Reeves, director, right? This is such an interesting moment for him. Now, are you how familiar are you with his previous work? I'm gonna run it down for you anyway if you don't know, but
I think I've seen some, but not all.
You've seen so the thing he most notably did previous to this, not to say this is my favorite thing he's done previous to this, but is the second and third of that new Planet of the Apes trilogy.
Yes, I've seen those, and I was a fan. I mean, I love anything Andy Serkis does, obviously, too. But yes, I was a fan of those. The second installment, Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, that one in particular is really, really good. Yeah, no. So totally, I love those movies too. And coming off of that, and I heard he was doing this, I did have a lot of faith because, I mean, I think they, in some ways, well underset the expectation though too, because as great as those movies are, with this movie's operating on a whole different fucking stratosphere in terms of directorial vision and execution and impact, right? But I think it also makes sense with some of his work even previous to that. Like, he has a background in doing horror and thriller. So, like, he made Cloverfield. He made the Let the Right One In. Is it Let the Right? Because I know they changed the remake's title is different.
Oh.
But yeah, he made that, not the fucking Swedish version, but the or Danish
amazing
version.
I didn't know he did that. Yeah. I love that movie.
Yeah, right. So exactly. So like the sort of horror trappings of this movie are right at home in the same way that, like, it was right at home for DePalma to do what he does, right? Because he's making Carrie, he's making Dress to Kill, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's all in that DNA. Like, so you have that, and I think just Reeves, this is such a cool moment for him because, you know, some people will say, oh, well, he's just mimicking other good directors. He's doing the same thing Todd Phillips tried to do with Joker, where he's just like, instead of biting off Scorsese, he's biting off DePalma and Hitchcock and Fritz Lang. And I'm like, no, not the same thing. And I'm not going to try to turn this into too much of a Joker conversation, but there's some of those points, especially when it comes to the political outlook and other things like that are very relevant, obviously. And we're talking the same meta IP of the Batman universe, the Gotham universe. But just on a filmmaking level, no, I don't think it's different because to me, Joker, which is not a movie I necessarily dislike, I quite enjoy it, but well, that's a weird way to phrase it. I like it. I think that is, as people have said, for better or for worse, a straight up recreation of like Taxi Driver, but King of Comedy too. And Joaquin Phoenix is just replacing De Niro. And it's like, okay, great. Joaquin Phoenix is an amazing actor, which is why it can work. And he got an Oscar for it. But on its own as cinema, it's not impressive to me fundamentally because it isn't adding anything. It's not really doing anything. The whole nature of genre, as I've dedicated a large part of this pod to trying to dissect, is about iteration. It's rather than saying like, oh, you're just going to copy, because sometimes people say copy this and they're stupid and people think like Hollywood regurgitating is new. It's like, no, it's been that since day one. That's what genre is. Genre is a way to remake the same movie and say it's not a remake. That's all it's ever been. But like out of that iteration, which is a commercial sort of need, art is born because there is art in the art of iteration. And so, for example, like when you take like a very early like Stagecoach Western, right? And then you iterate. And through iteration and through cousins and through this whole genealogy, it's like a family. It's like speciation. You end up with like some revisionist peck and paw, like super violent ass fucking movie. And there's a great Tarantino bit. Too bad I can't use it on the front of this because I technically already used it on the front of our genre Venn diagram episode, which hasn't been released yet. But yes, but there's this great Tarantino quote where he's like, if the Westerns in the 70s were the same as the Westerns in the 50s, that wouldn't make any sense. A Western in the 70s is a 70s Western. And a 70s Western it's got the DNA of Watergate. It's got this. It's got the years of cinema and technique between those things.
Absolutely.
So that's exactly my entire point. This is actually truly on strictly these terms, and in fact, on the highest level of these terms, the best that neo-noir has to offer, because it's taking all those things and iterating on them in a sensible and meaningful and useful way. And I'm not going to necessarily say, oh my God, it's a landmark in the scope of it, or it's like doing all these quote new things. It's not, but it doesn't need to. It's just doing good iteration. It's doing good analysis. It's doing good deepening, and it's doing it on the biggest stage possible, which, like it or not, is now exclusively reserved seemingly for superhero IP. So it's taking that superhero IP of Batman, which has always been drenched in these things, and saying, no, instead of like just like loosely alluding to it like past movies have,
right?
We are going to full-throatedly treat it like it is those things. And we're going to see where that takes us. And so that's, again, why I am 100% on the camp of this movie needs to, or its franchise, its would-be franchise, needs to stick to the fucking guns. If the next movie is not as fucking neo-noir as this one is, they fucked up. And I don't mean like it can't do something else, like it can't add more genres or more things. I'm just saying that like it can't portray that intention, or it will really have like been missing out, essentially. So now back to the Pattinson, right? Because the Pattinson is only the Pattinson with Robert Pattinson. That sounded like some crazy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I guess you did say like you really like him in this, but
I like him as Batman, but he has to prove to me that he can be my Bruce Wayne too.
No, look, a lot of people have said things like that. And so I guess where I'm at, not to just be redundant about it, but like where I'm at is, to me, that framing itself is what this is meant to be a challenge to. Like, that's why I want to use this Pattinson term, because it's like neither Bruce Wayne nor Batman, at least as we've thought of him in the past. It's something new, something different, something that like needs its own kind of rule book, and it's being written as we speak. But it's drawing from those previous rule books, and it's acknowledging that those previous rule books still exist in this world. Like Bruce Wayne still exists in this world. The Batman still exists in this world. But who this person is at his core is not necessarily the same as either of those would lead you to believe or have been in the past. And I think that's why Robert Pattinson is perfect casting, because if they wanted to go the direction I feel like they've been in the past, that's the other reason, just even on like a commercial level, I'm kind of like, I'm not sure. I don't like it. You can go look in Robert Pattinson's filmography. If you want to see what Robert Pattinson looks like cleaned up in suits and billionaire wear, you can watch Tenet or Cosmopolis.
Of course.
Like,
but
well, I know you just don't mean like you need to see it to see it. I'm saying like those exist.
I know he can do it. I know he can do it.
He can do it. He can do it. But look, like Bale was basically, I mean, it's not what Chris Nolan himself would say, but I know like it's just one of those things that I assert to be true. Nevertheless, Bale was cast because of American Psycho.
Of course.
Like, right. So it's like they were like, even though Christopher Nolan's ambitions and intentions weren't like anything of that meme, like they were like the sense of like why Bale was steeped in that Bruce Wayne persona that we're talking about. And to me, Pattinson is clearly fundamentally the opposite. I have no doubt that nothing about any of those roles I just mentioned, Cosmopolis, fucking Tenet, had anything to do with why he was cast in this. What it had to do with was more like Good Time and The Lighthouse. and even honestly, Twilight. Like my sister is a big Twihard, and like the Twihard of all Twihards. And Team Edward, like this is the type of dork my sister is. Okay, I literally have an Edward blanket that I need to give to her later today. yeah. Well, so she's obsessed with this, and she was just like, I knew she was gonna love the movie, but like part of the reason she loved it, I love it this for her, and like I recognize it too, even though it's not my interest, but it's all still part of the same texture. Is like, this is the character he was playing in 08. He's clearly like, it's a very much better script, much better everything. But it is that. Like, it's this sort of brooding, distant weirdo.
Brood. It's the like, perma brood with the hair in your face.
That's who he's playing. He's not playing that guy. He wasn't cast to play that guy. And I think it would have been a mistake to cast him if that's what the guy they wanted him to play. Like, that's genuinely how I see it. Like, I think not that he can't do it, but like, it just wouldn't make sense. Cause like, even like Neil in Tenet is not a Bruce Wayne type. Like, he might dress like him, but he's not a Bruce Wayne type. He's a kind of like weirdo. He's a kind of like sort of loosey-goosey, academic-y kind of like, he's basically a Christopher Nolan surrogate, as we talked about in the episode. Go listen to our Tenet episode. It's like one of the best we've ever done. Still. And very, I won't get into it.
Look at the map on YouTube.
Yeah, very prescient too now in a way that it wasn't when we had that conversation. I've actually been thinking about like promoting that a little bit, because I think a lot of what I was trying to say about the Satyr character and this apocalyptic ideology and like all that stuff is very relevant if you turn on your news right now. I'm sure everyone's aware who's listening to this. But yeah, I can only laugh, but it's not funny. But that's my saying. Like, this movie, in a very different way, is a movie of its time, and I am here for that. And so Robert Pattinson, he's to me the actor of this time. I mean, I'm like, when I think of Good Time and The Lighthouse, and just like The Road and all his movies, like, I'm a huge fucking Robert Pattinson fanboy. I like, you know what I mean? And it's like, this movie's making those out of everybody, I guess, which is great. But I am, and he does this shit well. And I'm so glad they did not waste him playing a version of the character that he wasn't suited for, and instead perfectly cast him to play the character that he plays. Like, that's what I mean. Like this, like the scene in the hospital, which I have problems with, and we'll get to, but like, where he's just like, you lied to me out. Like, that whole way he's playing, the way he's just like kind of like giving this like cold boy stare the whole time.
Yeah. Like,
that's real. Or, you know what a lot of people just pointed out, and I think this is very true, and some of this is just the way they did the costume design, and I think they did it with this in mind, and
he has a collar.
He has a collar. I like that collar a lot. I was staring at that collar a lot, trying to figure out how it works.
He can move his neck so much because it's not a cowl, it's like a collar.
Yeah. They TDK, like the second batsuit of Bale that he wears, and like they figured that out. That was like actually like their big innovation too. But like, this builds off of that innovation. For some reason, they reverted when they did Batfleck, and it was stupid. Anyway, I hate that Batfleck costume. I really do. I always did. I definitely do in hindsight.
I'm here for it for the nipples.
Wait, did that one have nipples? I don't think it did. The Affleck suit? Clooney and Kilmer. Clooney and Kilmer both had nipples. Only the Schumacher made movies had the nipples. And yeah, they all did. They noticed how they didn't put nipples on a fucking Barbara Gordon suit. I was like, what? that would have been hard R. It's just like weird, like male nipple, good, female nipple.
Yeah, everybody weird. Blur it out.
Weird, very weird. I mean, they would have had. Yeah. Oh man. So Yeah, no. I don't. Yeah, I don't like those suits. I definitely don't like the Affleck suit. I love this suit, but I don't think it's as cool as the Bale Dark Knight post Dark Knight suit. But I think we'll maybe get there. We'll get to something that's like distinct, very distinct from that. Very good. But this suit is still amazing. And what I was going to say about it is, this is less to do with, I think, anything in lore or story-wise function, but it's perfect for the movie. The amount of range and space it has allows Pattinson to really act in it. And that's actually, to me, his greatest achievement here.
That's a good point.
He's in that costume way more than other Batman have been in, like, certainly the Bale comparison. And it's a good thing that it works both ways, because it's like, it's great that he is so he can do this. It's great that he's able to do this because of the way it is. And
That's
that way
point,
it is.
Yeah,
it allows him to really act in it. Like, there are so many scenes where he's interacting with Catwoman towards the end when he's talking to Gordon. And I'm like, he's still giving the full performance because he can. And you can see it. You can see the way his eyes are moving. You can see the way his mouth and nose are moving. You can see the way his cheeks are moving. Like, the design of the thing is raised up just enough that you get a little bit of the bottom of the cheek. And that allows his expression to really still show through despite the cowl being on. So I think it's a brilliant innovation. And it's another way that this movie and its star and its character and its story all harmonize and synthesize perfectly. They really figured it out. Which brings us to the other most important character, which is not the Riddler or Penguin, but the cat, right? The Bat and the Cat has a nice ring.
Billy Kravitz.
Why Catwoman? Well, there's a lot of reasons. The biggest one is the genre one, I think. It was like, oh, I know TDKR just did a Catwoman, but they're like, we have to, because Catwoman is the canon of all canon Batman femme fatales, and you're doing a noir film. So you have to.
Right.
Like, you don't have a choice.
It makes sense. But also Falcone's in this, and that's his daughter. So
right.
Like,
it works on that too, but like, that's also a very noir twist. That like in and of itself, like, if there's always that tradition of like, I mean, have you seen Chinatown? Like this is
absolutely.
like this is kind of a thing. Like, so it makes sense, and including the weird pervy illusions of like incest going on there, very to the genre as well. And so that's perfect, but like the chemistry between the two is really important. Like Zoe Kravitz and Robert Pattinson, and of course now everyone like has already turned them into a couple, even though they're not. But that's just kind of how Hollywood works.
Yeah.
But I'm here for it, just in the sense that it's necessary, because like,
I think she's dating Channing Tatum.
she is.
Yes.
Ew, that doesn't
Channing
work.
Tatum.
I love Channing Tatum, but no. And you know what? I wish you didn't even tell me that till after this, because like, that's now going to throw me on.
TMZ told us.
Okay. Well, I didn't read it. You told me. So you are the messenger here.
Listen, you wouldn't have a guy get in trouble for just delivering drugs from one guy to another, would you? That was a reference to The Office.
No, I know, but I'm just laughing in my head because I'm also thinking about Channing Tatum's, his superhero ambition is to play Gambit, who's again the carbon opposite of this Batman, this Pattinson character. And I'm just like, no, my entire point is that this is what we need. This is what we're talking about. All that aside, no, I think what's really important to me about Catwoman, Selena Kyle, as both a character, as both the actor, Zoe Kravitz playing her, as the archetype of the femme fatale, is the way the archetype integrate. Again, there is tradition to this in noir, neo-noir, and these other genres, but she's also, and Catwoman herself, including the Anne Hathaway Catwoman. The Anne Hathaway Catwoman in TDKR was an attempt to some degree to use the character to bring a sense of class awareness to Bruce Wayne Batman. But it was very limited and did not really kind of work in any which way. That's part of like the issue with that movie. Which isn't to say I don't like the character. I love the character. But here, it is being used that way. And I would argue that despite some of the movie's slight stumblings to its full extent, and this is where some of the sort of hot takeism that's been floating around and some of the, kind of more openly political and culture war like fire about the stuff has been like kind of coming out. And like, I mean, a lot of it, what I'm referring to here is like the sort of like Zoe Kravitz being a multiracial person. Like, people have weird sort of feelings about that, which I'm pretty sure, like, I can't recall exactly. You can tell, you might know, but like, there is a comic basis to that too. Or at least in at least in like more recent, like retcons or reboots of it. I think I'm pretty sure. Like, or like, I always thought the Catwoman in year one, even though like there's not really color to it, like feels very Black lady. I mean, that sounds wrong to say it like that, but there's something about it that feels Black woman and like, in a way that like, you could say is fetishized in a certain kind of way at that time when that comic was being made. And you can kind of see this in Marvel comics too, in different characters. There's like all of a sudden their characters like drawn in a way where it's like they're not trying to say they're not white, but like it's almost like they want to pretend they're not. For a minute.
Well, I mean, for some people, Halle Berry is always going to be their Catwoman. You know what I mean? And
no, who the fuck is that? Who the fuck is that? Is that a real person that exists?
What?
Is that a real person that exists that Halle Berry is their Catwoman? Except as a
I'm
joke?
sure. I'm sure for me it's Michelle Pfeiffer, and probably always will be. However, I don't know if anyone says Anne Hathaway is their Catwoman.
Well, it would have been for me until this.
No, Zoe Kravitz didn't give me enough for this for her to compete for me. She just had this
with Pfeiffer.
Well, I don't know what it is. Zoe Kravitz, I've seen her do fantastic things, and for me, her performance here was kind of flat for a lot of lines. She gave kind of, and I get it.
It's not my favorite performance in the movie. I'll say that. I think
it's not my favorite performance from that I've seen from her lately. I mean, she's good in a lot of things.
Yeah, no. I'll even concede that. I don't think it's like her best by any, but I don't
think it's her best, and I don't think it's the best Catwoman.
I think, but okay. So I'll take both these points separately because I think when it comes to her in the thing, the thing that I most needed from her in this, I got, and I think but that's the same thing the movie most needed from her, like. And I was so drawn by this, like throughout the third time. It's definitely like there's a kind of. We're going to have to talk about this with I guess this now directly ties into what I mean about the character. This is again not only a neo-noir with a femme fatale, it's also a psychosexual thriller, and that bat-cat relationship is like where that most comes into the DNA, and it's getting to the core. This has always been part of the Catwoman Batman dynamic, but like. This movie, to me, like you can take the Burton version as more, quote, kinky in its own way, but I don't like that version of it in terms of that. This is because of the ground and because of the genre, because of like the way everything else is. This is actually getting much more to the core in an important and meaningful way for both the characters, particularly this Pattinson character, of his sexual repression. And this is really important because the sexual repression not only is fitting of the genres, it's also very important to this movie's politics, which I keep trying to get to, but I'm not getting in there yet. We're almost there. But it's really important because if you don't have that, this idea of him really just being Riddler, but if rich and better looking is like, doesn't work. Like they both need to be weird incels. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like that's like, they both have to have that. And they both have to have like a sort of like, like kinky, like S&M kind of manifestation to this direction in their lives. And the Riddler's costuming is like a gimp suit for a reason. Batman and Catwoman's costume is like they're going to a fucking leather party. I actually made the joke to my sister in the theater multiple times. The fucking Arrested Development, Tobias, probably the famous joke ever.
Oh my
I was
gosh,
like,
hilarious.
I'm looking for something that says leather daddy. Or, well, actually, no, what he actually says is, I'm looking for something that says daddy likes leather. And the guy like, it's like, do you mean leather daddy?
Leather daddy?
Like, I think
Yeah.
so.
I think so.
Oh no, he goes, oh, is there such a thing? Oh, one of the best scenes ever. That he comes back and he's like, with his chain, he puts his arms around George. But that's what this movie felt like. It literally felt like that. Like, just like a bunch of people were like really into leather, which is very appropriate, is what I'm saying. Because Gotham and this whole entire mood and the psychosexual thriller, it's always been like, we're just in like the whole club. That I love that part of it too. It's very noir in that sense, but also just very modern. It's doing the best of both. And again, that's why I love this Zoe Kravitz version, is because she feels like she is a part of that world, and she is the gateway into that world, just like femme fatales always are. It's like, Batman, you've been living in this like very overly masculine, like I just beat people up universe, and you forgot that there's other things that can express your rage, like sex. And I'm going to take you into the sexual underworld where all the lusts are being met. And that's why every politician and every fucking cop works there. Because it's like, oh, they're all engaging in vice too. Vice. These are all important ideas in the DNA of the genre. And they're important to the genre, not because that's not in of itself why it's important to me here. As I'm always trying to drive at, these traditions speak to something in human nature and speak to something in our real history and our real world, and they are in conversation. So this sexual repression is something that has consequence in the real world, and this movie's depiction of it is a reflection of that. That's why Batman being a voyeur is really important, which now, thankfully, is a great, perfect segue into let's break down the influences on this movie, which, again, Matt Reeves has been very clear about talking about. It's been talked about in a lot of places. I'm going to try to give a sort of like interesting kind of spin on it. And literally, I'm going to be like, kind of go through this weird sort of offspring loop, because that's kind of a loop, because it goes all from the past into the future, back to the past, back to the future. Not literally the movie Back to the Future. But so you can kind of start, and literally the movie starts with Hitchcock. You start with the POV, through literally the rear window, right? And the breathing, and like all of this represents what I just was talking about: sexual repression, sadism, kink, control. These are all the themes of Hitchcock's movies. Like, that's what you get in Rear Window, that in Vertigo, in fucking Rope. Oh God, Rope. Strangers on a Train. It's all about this dangerous repression and its expression, right? Like the obsessive male, and Hitchcock himself being this incredibly problematic and terrible guy, clearly actually plagued by these things in real life, right? So, it is what it is there. Then Hitchcock begets DePalma, who we did an episode on Blowout. Technically, that is still in the back catalog, but it'll hit everyone's ears eventually.
It'll be out one day.
It'll be out one day. It's actually one I'm very proud of, and one I have like requests to release, actually. Like,
oh, cool.
Multiple people who really want to hear that one. So yeah, I'm very excited about it, and because we got to really go in depth on DePalma, and I'm going to get back around to DePalma because he's also part of a later part of this narrative, right? You get from DePalma, you get to our main guy, David Fincher. You get your Sevens, you get your Zodiacs, you get your Mindhunter, you get all that shit, right? And then that's where I now go back to the past, because in a weird way, Fincher is just as much he's to tie through this Hitchcock to DePalma to him kind of psychological thriller, murder thriller, serial killer, horror, suspense thriller kind of thing. He's also very tied to a sort of more moody, brooding, sort of male deconstructionist. That's what Fight Club is. Noir tradition, which I always put, not like literally he invented it or anything, but he's like a very important player in both the sort of roots of the era and like the actual golden age or prime of the era, which is German filmmaker Fritz Lang, who came to Hollywood and made things like The Big Heat. And it's like you get from that Fritz Lang, you get that what's like the influence of Fritz Lang to me is very obvious. Like, you know, Fritz Lang made the movie M. It's like this hunting down of this killer, like this obsessive hunt, and like piecing together these clues and the uses of the shadows and all that stuff. And obviously that's, again, something Fincher's pulling a lot from. And so from Fritz Lang, you get organically your noir and your pulp going into the Depression era, and then the war, and then coming back from the war, and the like this sort of like sense that was very grounded in the 40s and early 50s, that like if you lived in the city, because the city is part, and that's also where the German part too, German expressionism comes out of modernism, which comes out of this like sense of the city and the urban environment as like this sort of end state of history, like where you're like, now we have spires that mount from the earth. And like the way they depict Gotham is very much in that tradition of like, look, and that's why I love the decision to make Wayne Tower, Wayne Manor the same thing. Because it's like, it is just this giant phallic penis on the air. And it's like, everything just runs right into it. And it's like this tower that overlooks, it's like the panopticon. It's like, it overlooks everything. It's like the center of the world. And there's historical reasons why it's a very fitting choice as well. And yeah, I think having that root, you get this sort of like out of that, this sort of like kind of gothic-y shadow, Nosferatu kind of sort of like impressionist kind of response to that, right? And that's what leads you back to noir and dealing with the, as I alluded to, the trauma of the Depression, the trauma of masculinity in an environment where you can't get work. This is something we've talked a lot about on the pod. The trauma of violence. And so much of noir like is steeped in this idea of like we like to valorize the macho hero who shoots people. And noir has that, but noir is a deliberate subversion of that. And because what it does is, it's like, here's this so-called macho hero, and he's a drunk who hates himself. And every time he shoots someone in the face, he like a part of his soul dies. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, awesome, sick. Right. You know what I mean? And that's why I fucking love this Batman, because he's that. He's like a fucking totally like soulless creep at the start of this movie. Like he's absolutely out of his fucking mind. And so it makes perfect sense. The Riddler, the way the Riddler sees him is how he is. It's not false. Like the journey is him recognizing that the Riddler's right. They're like, oh yeah, no, you are actually just calling me out for exactly who I am on both identities. He calls the Batman out for exactly who he is. Like that. Oh my God, I wasn't even expecting to jump to this, but thank God I did. The fucking scene and the between the glass, the interrogation team tells you everything you need to know, because that's where you get the confrontation. And Batman himself feels his identity fracturing apart, because you start that scene the way it's paced and structured with the tensions. And that's what I mean about Reeves being inspired by Hitchcock and DePalma and Fincher, because you know what they always did great? And Lang, you don't say, you show. And if you have the right actor and the right eye lines, like he's not sitting there saying, oh God, I found out, blah, blah, blah. No, you know, because of the context, and you know, because of the performance, the way he holds that close up. And like I said, the way the suit's designed, you can still see all the twitches in his cheek, the twitches in his eye, the twitches in his mouth, right? And you are looking at it. And also, here's another great thing that they gave Rob Pattinson brought to this. It's a weird thing. Michael Keaton, I guess, maybe does have blue eyes, but like, and so did Val Kilmer, but like, it doesn't matter. Like, this is like the first like pointedly blue-eyed Batman. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess
Did that
so.
like come through
Wait,
to you?
does Clooney have blue? Doesn't Clooney have blue eyes too?
No, I don't think so. His eyes definitely are brown.
I don't know.
Clooney and Bale are brown-eyed people. I'm pretty sure of that. But and Affleck too. So yeah, there's been a minute, but like the way the eye makeup is done, the way again the cows and the way the scene is lit, especially with the shot I'm talking about of him, like that like close up of Batman reacting to the Riddler's talk in that interrogation scene, you really shine the light into those eyes, and so the blue eyes are like piercing through the black, right? And why I'm drawing that is because it allows you to see the twitch in those eyes. And the twitch in those eyes is very important because what's being so thoroughly communicated, and I don't doubt this, like I can feel it in the theater, a packed theater, exactly how people are reacting to it. I've heard multiple people explain it, their reaction to that sequence. But there's a deeper thing going on that I'm not sure they're getting. Oh, they're like, oh, he thinks the starting frame point of the scene is, and everything leading up to this point has led you to believe this as well, that the Riddler knows Bruce is Batman. And as a result, what he's doing is baiting and threatening Batman to expose him. That I'm going to expose your Bruce Wayne. That my target is the Batman because my target's Bruce Wayne, right? And as the scene goes on, it's very cleverly done because the whole lead up, the Bruce Wayne chanting, this and that, even his whole explanation about everything that's like so like inherently insulting to his very existence about Bruce Wayne, right? Like his whole story about it. Is still in that mindset of like, oh shit, he's talking to him. And that's how Pattinson and Rob are registering it. You can see it on their face. And then you can see on their face the moment where it hits them and the music score drops at that moment too. That no, he doesn't think that. And so the gut immediate reaction is, oh my God, I have the advantage, this and that. I haven't been found out. Great. Again, like great psychological thrillers, like great noir stories. If that was the only thing you got out of that, you're really not as smart as I thought you were. And the reason for that is because the point of the scene is not that. The point of the scene is that the distinction is the illusion. Batman, he's being found out on both levels. Riddler is exposing to Pattinson who Bruce Wayne is. It's already been kind of being exposed to him and he's had to deal with it. But now it's being directly thrown in his face by a person who has the ability to really say it in a way that cuts deep. Immediately after that, what actually happens is only thing that happens is the frame shifts. And it shifts from a conversation about who Bruce Wayne is to a conversation about who Batman is, the Batman. Vengeance. He's like, no, you're my best friend. I did this because of you. Like, we're in this together. Haven't you been listening to anything I've told you? Like you did all my work for me. It was you brought Falcone out. Like, you did everything for me. We make a great team. And he's like,
aren't you proud of me?
Aren't you proud of me? And he's like, Pat, he gets angry because at this point, he's like, fuck you. But he's angry because he knows he's right. He was right about Bruce and he's right about Batman. He perfectly told him. It's actually a weird movie where the villain actually gives you the answers, ironically, the Riddler. He gives you all the answers. Or gives you hear all the answers. He's like, no, here's your issue. The issue is Bruce Wayne is terrible. Batman's terrible. You're terrible. And he's like, oh shit, I am terrible. Fuck. Like now what do I do? And like, he's telling him what he's always known too. Because deep down, Mr. Pattinson knows the Batman is terrible. He knows he's a fucking sick, perverted fascist. He knows Bruce Wayne's terrible. He knows he represents like the exact sort of hypocritical rot and excess and privilege and bullshit that he needs to be. If he wants to stand for something, it at least should be for that. And he's been given every turn, like Alfred and Monica Real, like the most like on the nose pun ever. But like, actually, I think that's the genius of it. Real change. No, real change is exactly not real change. It's another lie. And I'm very curious to see how the sequel is going to address this. This is part of what I mean about where the movie kind of stumbles a little bit, but a sequel hopefully retroactively will double down on the correct things and not double down on the wrong things. We'll see. We'll see where they take that character. I actually know that actor. Sorry, that's a different conversation.
Awesome.
Yes, but and she's great, but like it's another lie, it's another illusion, and Bruce is just like Alfred said. That's why we're going to talk about it more in a second. But like the scene that pissed me off the most was the Alfred hospital scene, because that was the scene where they really started to take the edge off of the movie that the movie had worked so hard to earn and had so impressed me by. And I was like, stop fucking trying to soften this. Like, you're ruining it. You're fucking ruining it in real time. And thankfully, after that scene, the movie doesn't quite like get back there, but it does enough to like make me feel like, okay, it's not trying to totally like betray its noir guts. Like, it's not trying to totally betray its moral ambiguity.
Well, at the very end, you have the motorcycle in the cemetery scene that's like 5 minutes long. He rides the motorcycle, she rides the motorcycle, they ride the motorcycle, then they ride the motorcycle together, then they separate one by one from the motorcycle and go their own ways. That's so noir.
It's yeah, it is. It's also just, again, referencing Fincher. It reminded me so much of the end of Fincher's Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Like
Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Yeah. Oh yeah, another big.
I see that for sure. I see that. Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, like that. To my point, this version of Catwoman and that whole influence is like, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is an attempt at sort of getting at a sort of like, kind of anti-sexist, anti-fascist critique of Sweden and its problems, and from a kind of a, I mean, people have knocked it, slam credentials like us. Well, you know what? Hold on. What am I doing? I don't want to get into that whole debate about the Girl with the Dragon. That's for another pod.
Another day.
That's another pod. This movie does not need that to be in the conversation. But you just know it's obviously a reference point, at the very least visually, but I think more so. So my point is, so you go from the noir and pulp roots, right, to detective comics, literally, and then to your full-on heyday and the Hollywood version of Lang. And then from there, you get 70s gritty urban crime action and neo-noir. And I'm talking about the films of Pakula, Coppola, Sidney Pollock, all those conspiracy thrillers, the DePalma movies, again, bringing it back around to DePalma. And actually all that inspires, in large part, the Frank Miller revisionism of like The Dark Knight Returns, followed by Year One, followed by The Long Halloween. And I've never read this comic, but a lot of people have cited this, and what I know about it, that makes a lot of sense. Are you familiar with the Hush storyline? You know what I'm talking about? Hush. It's literally called
storyline. I don't know if I
Batman.
have.
It's like it's Batman Hush. It's the name of the villain. It's literally called Hush.
I need to see him.
You should look that up. I'm surprised you don't know about this. I thought you were about to school me on it and like film.
Maybe if I see it.
Well, they made an animated movie out of it. I haven't seen or read any of it, but what I know of it, and I've heard about it for a long time.
Oh, yes.
Batman
Beyond. Yes. Hush. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No. So
he's a doctor, I think.
Well, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who doesn't know, including myself.
I'm trying to remember what I remember.
But there's literally a part where Riddler writes "Hush" on his thing, and like, so people like, there's a lot. That's like a deliberate Easter egg, but also just like thematically fitting, because it's again another Batman serial killer hunt story, right? And one that again goes down that rabbit hole of like, you think your morality and your perspective are valid, but they're not, right? They're actually all lies. And you're a part of the same system that you are trying to allegedly change. Now, then from those comics, not necessarily chronologically, though, you have the classic 90s animated series, which had the movie The Mask of the Phantasm, which is also clearly an influence on that, and was very attempt to make a more noir detective kind of Batman story on the big screen. And obviously, just chronologically, you then bequeath your Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. We've already kind of dissected like the importance and differences there. But all that just leads you back to where we are here, which is the Batman, neo-noir, thriller, horror, psychodrama, I would say neo-superhero. Because like this movie to me we'll see retroactively. I feel like this movie actually ushers in a new era of what I would want to start calling the neo-superhero era. And the reason I say it is because we're now in a place, and there's been some experiments in this, but this is the first like thing where we've gotten past the hurdle of so-called director bullshit. As a term I borrowed from the podcast The Watch, if people are familiar with it. So-called director bullshit and into like I was saying earlier, legitimate iteration and genre and right. Like this isn't just, again, we love Captain America, the Winter Soldier, but like when the Russo brothers keep talking about parallax view, I'm like, guys, you did not make the parallax view. Stop it. Like, I love the movie, but stop saying that. And when we do a podcast on it, I'll still talk about the parallax view, but like, there's a difference. This is actually doing the thing, like as we've established ad nauseum at this point. So as a result, I think we've now gotten to a point where superhero cinema can transcend superhero cinema for real now. And we'll see where that takes us. It might not take us anywhere, but if it starts to really take us some places, then I think it's fair to say that this is the start of a new era. And that's interesting and exciting. And MCU is still going, but it's a distinctly post-MCU era in that sense too. But yeah, so now finally at long last, and this is hopefully will take us into kind of our conclusion here. But this is a lot to handle. So I've been kind of trying to chew on the edges of this. Because this could open up a debate, and you might feel any number of different ways about any of what I'm about to say, Dana. But I'm going to try my best to just like state these things as though they're uncontestable for the basis of making the ultimate point I'm trying to make, and I'm hoping this kind of convinces you. But like, it's going to be difficult to do that with the limitations I just placed on it. So I kind of said this. Batman, or I'm going to call him right now. I don't know if you caught this in the movie. Some people have been debating this online. Well, Pattinson is what I've been calling him, but I specifically said I didn't want to call him Vengeance because that's being used somewhere else. And
exactly.
Allegedly, the way it's like, I would love, by the way, this is a side note, but it's an important side note. I would love them to do like a official canon to this movie prequel that is like a year one, just so I know some specifics, more specifics than we have right now about it. I like that I have to fill in my own blanks. I don't want them to fill in everything, actually, to that point. I like that. It makes it, again, feel less like this MCU belabored, no offense to the MCU belabored what we've been getting, the superhero factory, where everything is just to fill in the next piece, and more like real cinema where...
I agree with you here.
Yeah, totally. Like where I don't know everything. I actually am starting from a place of not knowing shit, and the movie's not going to give me every answer, and it might never give me those answers, and I not even really necessarily want it to. So I don't want them to get rid of that, but I do think there is room to not ruin it, but still like explore some interesting things. So what I'm talking about specifically is the name, the Batman, and who gave him that name, and how most people refer to him or don't. Because it seems that like the news calls him the Batman, and it seems like as a result or as a consequence, Alfred will refer to him as the Batman, and clearly the Riddler addresses him as the Batman. But it seems like the criminal underworld that he's actually interacting with call him what he says his name is, which is just Vengeance. And you might say, oh, I thought that was just like a cool line read, and that's what I thought at first. But no, a lot of people have brought it up that it's not quite that. And every time I've seen the movie, I've seen this interpretation makes more sense to me. So where I'm at is no, he named himself literally Vengeance. And he's trying to tell people that's his name. And people are just throwing this other Batman name, which... Yeah,
people are like, no, you don't get this cool superhero movie. You get Batman. You're the Batman.
Exactly. That's, I think, even part of his first reaction to the first letter from the Riddler. It's like, dude, you're calling me Batman? Lame.
Damn it. I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be
I wanted to be emo and call myself Vengeance.
It goes with my hair.
Totally. No. And that's another reason why I think that is the intention, because of all those other factors, because it fits with all that. So, but who is Vengeance? And by extension, who is Batman? And this is what I mean about this movie finally feeling like a movie that in a post Frank Miller, post like Dark Knight Returns universe is addressing some of the things that all that brought to attention literally fucking 40 years ago, which is that Batman is kind of like not a hero at all. He's a fucking psychopath. And like no one should be praising what he's doing. Like unless you are straight up like kind of a fascist or kind literally a fascist.
Right.
I'll tell you why. Because what does Batman do? What is the first thing we see him as Batman do? It's not go to the crime scene of Riddler. The whole intro sequence to him is amazing. I love it. I love it because it's nakedly what it actually is for the first time. Like the Dark Knight movies kind of feigned at this, but then quickly got away from it / never really got to it at all, which is Batman's a guy who dresses up at night and for seemingly no reason, because it's not like he even thinks it's, quote, making a difference. Like he writes in his journal and the first thing he says is like, I don't think I'm making a difference. And he's not. It's like, he's just going out and beating up, like, let's be honest, Black and brown people, presumably poor people who, yes, are criminals, but are in gangs. But the first guy he's stalking is like, it's his initiation night. Presumably he's never done anything that bad. And you know what I mean? Like, absolutely, all those guys at one point were that guy. So he's just a guy who's, again, a rich white dude going out at night and beating the shit out of people, mostly Black and brown people, certainly mostly poor people who are suffering in the corrupt city because of the corrupt systems. And just, I don't even want to keep using the word corrupt. Obviously, the movie uses that word. It's an important word to noir vocabulary, but I just want to say the system. Corrupt implies that somehow there's like an uncorrupt version. And I would argue in this movie, I would say, is aware of, no, it's always been this way. It'll always be that way. The last thing Catwoman says, it's never going to change, right? And I love that Matt Reeves has talked about this. Actually, it again tells me that he's not going, it gives me some faith that he's not going to fuck up the sequel. He said, no. Gotham can never change. That's why Batman exists. Like if Gotham suddenly actually could, like, you know what I mean? Like, and there's a bad version of that, mind you, too. I think the end of the movie and the conflict between Batman and Catwoman hopefully symbolizes what I would say is, again, the synthesis we want, the best of both worlds that we want, which is Gotham will never change because the system will never change unless the system does change. But the system can't be changed by Batman beating up people. Not that way that he's exactly right. So the movie is at least starting to get to the idea, maybe actually that doesn't solve anything, which has then caused this weird reaction of like some degree of awareness of certain types of people who I might characterize as legitimately fascist, being like, oh, this movie hates Batman. Like, well, no, it hates Batman the way we ought to recognize Batman to be at this point in our maturity as a culture. And again, in a post Dark Knight Returns world, like the Frank Miller version of Batman, and that this is what's weird about, Batfleck, is that like Batfleck was basically like Frank Miller version of Batman. They didn't quite do it right. And they did neuter him like motherfucker. But like the whole point of the version of that character is that he's like completely like a villain. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know why people don't get that. So yeah, and he's like, I mean, no, they're like, Superman's the worst villain. I'm like, yeah, right. You're right on both counts. It's about like psychotic weirdos beating each other up in fights. Like, you're not getting this. And obviously, like Watchmen, Rorschach, that whole thing. Yeah. Like, Alan Moore got all this already. That's what the Rorschach character is. That's what the core of Watchmen is. So
Watchmen, yeah, absolutely.
People who know that, like, none of what I'm saying should be controversial on that point if like you've absorbed this stuff. I know it is, but that's just because people just don't want to deal with it. So to me, taking that route, and like I said, instead of making him some grizzled little guy, but a year 2 Batman, and then putting him in the modern world, kind of puts the context in, instead of this like 80s boomer kind of like greatest, well, actually more like greatest generation, like I'm a grizzled ass like motherfucker from World War II who like fucking will kill the gooks and the Nazis and all this shit. Like, not to Vietnam, but yeah, like you get what I'm saying. Like this sort of like very just like light them up on fire type of thing. That's very retrograde. It's saying like the modern version of the same sort of like demented, violent angst is, which isn't to say that these things aren't cool or inherently violent. Like I'm not actually doing the 90s thing. Is like this, like, hey, the goth kid at school, like shoots up the school. Like this was obviously something that emerged into the culture in the 90s with the Columbine shooting. And a lot of people point to Marilyn Manson, this and that, but like obviously another roots of like 90s pop culture is the grunge era. And like, you know, yes, it was by his own hand, but Kurt Cobain was a guy who died in violence, right? Like suicide is a form of violence.
Of course, self-inflicted violence.
Yeah. So there is this sense of like, and again, bringing it forward and like, you know, it's like, again, I'm not trying to pile into the I think bad stereotypes of goth and emo and punk and all these different things, which are, again, primarily music and fashion subcultures as being like inherently like bad or violent or like any of the bullshit you see on 6 o'clock Nancy Grace and shit. What I'm saying is that those things, like I'm pointing out with Batman is Batman and Bruce Wayne is Bruce Wayne, doesn't matter what Pattinson himself thinks those things are. They are what people see, right? Same thing here. They are what people see. And so this movie is reflecting that back. So to me, it makes sense. And the handsome rich guy version of it is perfectly Robert Pattinson. So Pattinson, that's what I'm saying.
It could be.
But I'm saying that is that. It is that because you can't have it. When you put those things together, you get what you get with him. Like, because
I see what you're saying. What you're saying. That
plus that equals this. You can't add something to something and then have the same thing that you started with or are adding from. It would have to be added to. Likewise, the Riddler is the same with a subtraction or with a different addition that you could say. The Riddler is just straight up the modern idea of what we might consider to be a neo-fascist. He's this sort of anti-corruption crusader, and that's not a lie. It's 100% true. Like everything he does, everything he says is true. Like that's our irony with this obsession with no more lies. And what does a dead liar do? He lies still. Is that Riddler's always honest, actually. Everyone he says is guilty of something. They're guilty of
They are guilty, yeah.
Every single thing he said happened to him as far as we know, other than his fake like identity cards. Like he's telling the truth. He's not like making, as far as we know, we have no reason to believe he's making any of this stuff up about like his backstory. Not yet. I mean, they could retcon it. That would certainly be a different noir trope of like the villain who lies about his background. I mean, Nolan's Joker did that, right?
Yep, exactly.
So that's fine. But as far as we know, everything he's saying is true. And if everything he's saying is true, then he fits the profile I'm talking about quite perfectly, right? Because the modern neo-fascist, the alt-righter, whatever, they often point to things that are there, and traditional fascists have done this. Like they point to certain things that are at least there perceptually, if not factually. And perception is fact for this intent and purpose. And they say, look at that. Look, like this whole society is falling apart. This is who we blame. This is who's in power. This is their crimes. This is the real things they've done. The issue isn't what they're pointing to. The issue is what they think is the solution. What they think is the solution, which pretextuals or stems from how they even perceive the problem in the first place, which is that the problem is with the sort of, I don't really want to say this, but like, you kind of know, who the Nazis didn't like, right? They blame it on them, right?
Right.
The Riddler's not doing that, but you could easily see a version.
Easily.
Yeah. You can easily version it where, I mean, look who the new mayor candidate is. You know what I mean? Like there's like this thing where, these things are chosen deliberately. So there is a perception of like, oh, like you could say he's killing a lot of white male dudes, but like there's also the perception that these are the white male dudes that have cucked to the rest of the world. And yeah, like that, some degree, that's like almost too easy a stretch, but like I think the rest of it makes up for it. So it doesn't even, I don't even sweat that part. Because the point I'm making is that it doesn't matter what the pointing to is, it doesn't matter what that is. What matters is the fact that their fundamental solution, the only solution they're interested in, which isn't a solution at all, is violence, is hanging people high, is just like straight up, like not anarchy in the actual political sense, but chaos and collapse and just total like mess, which they recontextualize as strength and blah, blah, blah. And it'll be interesting to see in the same way, because this is what I was about to get to, the way the Riddler is truly inspired by vengeance or the Batman is if the next villain, I'm not talking about the Joker cameo, we can talk about that last, but the next villain, because I think it might be someone else. I think they might be playing a longer game with that. Yeah. It would just be too like lame to be like, oh, remember how the second Nolan movie did the Joker after you see, like, you know, come on, let's not do that. I just hope they don't do that. I think it'd be interesting they're playing a longer game because I think the next villain should be someone inspired by the Riddler. You know what I mean? To continue this chain of like, and therefore
someone like the Riddler, not the Riddler.
Yeah, it would be interesting if he was even more fascist kind of, if that makes sense. And I think that would be the natural progression because you go from, oh, now that this rot has been exposed, now we need to militarize against it, right? That kind of vibe would be interesting to me. But yeah, so getting back to the Batman, Riddler is genuinely inspired by him because from what anyone would know, right? And that's what's so revealed in that scene that we were talking about, where it's like he doesn't see Bruce Wayne and the Batman as the same person. That would be fundamentally incompatible. The irony that they are compatible is the same irony of that, like, it's actually Riddler, you're really not as smart as you think you are, because you should be able to recognize, or I guess he does by the end of that scene, when he himself says the line I just quoted, that like, oh, I am more of the real deal than you are. You are actually a poser. You're not a real, like, shoot up the school guy. I am. You're the poser. You just beat kids up occasionally and like act emo, but I'm actually like the sort of like, it's hard to, I'm speaking from the perspective of this person who's not well, hero, right? Like I'm the real hero who's going to kill all the phonies.
Well, of course. I mean, every villain doesn't think they're a villain. They have to think that they're doing something purposeful and put something meaningful just by any means necessary.
Right, exactly. But that's the thing. That also applies to the Batman.
It also applies to the Batman.
He thinks he's doing good, and the story is about him realizing that he's really not. And Riddler calling him out on it is actually, even though he doesn't even know the degree to he's calling him out, because he's calling out both identities.
We're the same. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, he doesn't even see the connection there, but Pattinson does, because he is both people. And so he's like, shit, man, I am really not doing anything good. I am directly causing all the pain. And I like that because I like stories that have a real sense of their cause and effect and don't shy away from it. So to me, this cause and effect here is very important. So think about the assumption. So I got back to like why he doesn't think Batman and Bruce Wayne are the same people. It's entirely a class-based presumption. And there's actually this also why Batman misses the most important clue. And that leads to him being like, oh, you're really not as smart as I thought you are. So Batman, he assumes Batman can't be Bruce Wayne because he identifies with Batman. And he can't identify with Bruce Wayne because Bruce Wayne is the rich phony that he is essentially like the chief target of his entire ire. It's like all the other people he's killing, he actually doesn't even care about that much. It's Bruce Wayne that he really hates. And it's coming from this perspective, like, I am an actual person from poverty, literally had rats chew my fingers at night. Like, you know what I mean? I was a drug addict. Like, he just casually mentions that, but he was like a drug addict as a child. These are all real things that child poverty involves, by the way. So like, Again, very like the clarity there on that. And he knows Batman because he assumes Batman has to also be from a working class or impoverished background like him to therefore have the motivation that he's projecting into Batman because it's his motivation, right? He uses the Tucker. Remember, it's the cop who tells him later.
Right.
Who is, of course, just like an average Joe working class cop. That's why he knows. Oh, my uncle's a carpenter. He's like, yeah, he uses the Tucker and he assumes that Batman knows what that is. But Bruce Wayne has never seen
a Tucker, has never worked with his hands in any capacity.
Exactly.
Right.
So he missed the most important clue because of that. And Riddler assumed he would know the most important clue because of the opposite assumption.
Exactly.
So that's why it actually takes, and I like, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, I mean, I guess you probably did. That's the same cop who's like being really rude to Batman.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same cop. They did the same shot and he was happy to see him.
Of making use of a character, not just having him be like that throwaway guy who's like, who's this freak? Which every Batman movie has. It's like a stop Batman character. Cop who says, who's this freak? But actually, again, another thing I love about this movie is that it actually seems to care about the freak part. So here's the point. If you follow Riddler's logic and therefore Batman's ultimate conclusion from that logic in his own journey of self-recognition, which involves, even though I hate the fucking stupid cop-out scene with Alfred, that his parents are as much a part of all this as anything else, which also means the Wayne renewal thing is as part of much of anything else, which is again why, by the way, just finally circle back to it, why this idea of like the billionaire philanthropist thing that even Monica Real, not real Real, like real diet, is trying to tell him is like, well, no, that's what my dad did. And that's what didn't work. Are you like missing the last?
Yeah.
Like that's literally what didn't work. Like, so no. And it doesn't work in real life either, newsflash. So that's the point, is like the movie clearly actually is aware. They're not like all philanthropy is bad or pointless. I'm not trying to say that. I'm not being that type of cynical. And I actually think where the movie really shines is that, to get back to that final synthesis. So noir is known genre-wise, and likewise the 70s gritty thrillers, the conspiracy movies that reflect the Watergate post-JFK assassination era, right? They're known for this sort of cynicism, or this perceived cynicism, or very real, depending on how you look at it and depending on what movie you're talking about, of like, nothing will ever change. It's essentially giving in, we talked about this before, like this
sort of,
the way
it's always been, the system is just like this.
I liken this idea to, and the Joker, the Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix is very much grounded in this, which again is trying to mimic these 70s movies. I've likened this, but I brought this up before. I liken this to this sort of like what I call like, or not I call, other people have called this kind of capitalist realism kind of framework, where essentially what you're saying is these things are the way they are. I can only perceive of them being the way they are because they are the way they are. And therefore, if I don't fit into that, I only have two choices. Either I change to fit into it, which might not even work, or I become essentially a villain and then reject it, which is the path of a Joker or Riddler, or in a way less extreme person, Catwoman. Like, she kind of represents that voice, which is why even up into the end, she goes, oh, you'll never change any of this. Now, she's more right than the bullshit of, no offense, Monica Real, or even Jim Gordon, who I think Jim Gordon is relatively neutral, but his role, and like this is the role he plays quite throughout the whole movie, certainly at the beginning, is like he's the naive cop. He's like the guy who's like, oh, wait, what are you saying? You're saying all these other cops are bad? Like, he doesn't know. Yeah. Which, again, the other cop-out scene that I don't like. But I feel like this might have been just something a studio may have insisted on, or I don't know. I don't want to give it to that. I think Matt Reeves probably made the movie he wanted to make, and if there's conflict or contradiction or things that I think are cop-outs, it's on him, or I'll put it to him until I know otherwise, and hope that he makes up for it in the sequel, and that the better sort of, more, to my mind, real and grounded and truthful and powerful messages are the ones that went out. I don't like the cop-out scene where they're taking Falcone out to Varese, and all of a sudden now there's all these cops. And like, again, like here's the irony, and this is true of the Alfred scene. This is like kind of one of the points I want to make sure I stick before we go here. They're realistic. Like Alfred didn't stick by Bruce and raise him for 30 years to be like, oh, now that you know some of like what allegedly happened, now I actually, you're right. Your dad was a bad person, or slash like there wasn't anything wrong with what happened. No, he's gonna defend him. He's gonna find a way to like change the narrative. And it's on Bruce whether he buys it or not. Or like buys like, well, because what I would say is I think Alfred's probably like 30% right. Obviously, Falcone's not being honest. But like there's definitely more ambiguity than the scene itself. Because that's what I mean. There's a difference between characters behaving realistically to themselves and therefore maybe being dishonest or stretching the truth, and the movie itself seemingly almost letting that paste over. And that's what I feel like the movie does. Because again, it's realistic to me that Gordon slash like there would be like, because in a GCPD, if it's like the NYPD it's clearly based on, means there are like 100,000 cops. Like it's not like there's not a bunch of random cops who have never talked to Falcone or anybody, have never taken a buyout, never would in their head be like, oh, I totally want to be there when we bust Falcone and like look like the cop on TV. Of course.
It's that puppet meme. Right. Like, we're here to catch the bad cops. And they're like, oh, looking around.
Right. So it's not like that's not an honest scene. It's a very honest scene. It's just that having it the way it has it makes it feel like the movie is trying to pretend like the problem that it was just highlighting in red 2 seconds ago isn't, or has an easier out than it's like they're walking back. You know what I mean? And that's what I mean about the Alfred scene. It feels like it's walking back. And honestly, what really is like my biggest critique of the movie is even the pacing of that scene. Because it's like you find out all the stuff about Tom and Martha Wayne, and then like literally like 15 minutes later, he's in the hospital with Alfred, and Alfred's saying that. So it's like, dude, you even let it like at least like let Batman have to stew in it a while longer before you do that. You know? I just felt like it was such a desperate. The fact that the cop out happened so quick almost like reeked of the desperation of the movie to like kind of put it behind it. This is the final point. This is actually the movie end. The strength of the movie and why I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt for the sequel and just even on its own for all the above I've just said is because the way the actual movie ends with him taking the torch, like people have read it a certain way that makes them think like, oh no, now Batman is all about like philanthropy and good works. And that's why we'll see this billionaire playboy Bruce Wayne or at least like a sort of like almost like Thomas Wayne politician clone Bruce Wayne in the next movie, both of which I don't like. No, I don't think that. There's a reason he's doing it in the Cape and Cow. And there's a reason the flare is red. And there's a reason he's pulling these people out in this like sort of like, you could say almost like some people have compared it to 9/11 imagery, which it is, but like I want to transcend that even or reaffirm a different take on that. This is Batman realizing that genuinely he needs to have solidarity with the people of Gotham. And that's what he's basically saying. Like the city is angry. He goes from I'm angry or the city's my enemy to the city is me. The city
is me.
We are the same. We're in this together. And I don't care where it's coming from. Like, I don't feel like he's like, oh, now the new mayor is going to fix everything. I feel like he's like, I got my fucking eye on you. like you better. And I'm not going to then go pal around like Bruce Wayne. Like, that's good. I want him to be like, the progression to me should look maybe a little bit more like, maybe I get showered and I go outside. I'm going outside to like go like talk with people, you know, go see what's up in the daylight a little bit, just a little. And I'll just say the comic I won't have time to talk about it, but like, it's an interesting recommendation. There's a very famous Superman comic called Superman Red Sun. There's a version of Batman in that. I won't say more, but it's a very interesting, in the same way the sort of Soviet Union version of Superman is a very interesting inversion. Their inversion of Batman is kind of like another interesting inversion that I think is maybe weirdly more truthful to a potential Batman we could be getting here, which is interesting. So all that's interesting. And I think that is the new heroic mythology. We should go the quote, as I say, all caps, real way rather than the real way. No offense to, again, the character who didn't do anything bad in this movie, but like, I'm like, come on, you're mayor now. So, you know, money talks. But all right, Dana, any closing thoughts on the Batman you didn't get out?
I think we hit the thoughts. I think we'll know my final verdict after the next installment is out.
Joker, the man who laughs. By the way, that is the last thing I have to say. Our logo is the Conrad Veidt man who laughs. That's the new, I mean, it's the original inspiration for the Joker. But Matt Reeves talk about, we're going back to that. His face is just literally stuck in a smile. So there you go. Go watch your silent films.
Okay.